folks, let me just tell you, this is an iceberg stream. That means we're going to be going deep. Not really an iceberg. It's a meteorberg, a spaceberg. Kind of the same idea, though. Iceberg in the sea, meteor in space. We're going to go down the meteorberg. These are all individual theories, kind of, but they also function as steps, putting together the bigger picture. Funny story. When I first started out on Westeros.org writing essays, which turned into podcasts, which turned into this YouTube channel, I busted out my first couple essays and just started getting into the Great Empire of the Dawn stuff. Someone told me, someone that I respected and liked my stuff, he's like, this is really good, but don't try to tie it all together. Don't try to create one of those unifying theories. Well, here we are, folks. We're going to tie it all together. We're going to do just that. He was wrong. He was wrong, as it turns out. So we are going to walk through the steps of the Great Empire of the Dawn theory, but really this is just a history of the ancient world. As my friend, a new moderator and myth head and freaking contributor, has noticed, George has tucked his old school classic fantasy influences in the Far East. So Conan, Lovecraft, Tolkien, stuff like that. A lot of that can be found in the East. And it's almost, and then when we get over to Westeros, it's all kinds of stuff, but there's a lot of obviously medieval history with the Yorks and Lancasters and stuff. When we go back to the East and the origins of the world, we're going to be drawing from influences of classic fantasy. So there's a lot of tropier stuff than what's in the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire. But of course, a lot of what George does that's really cool is to take tropes, classic fantasy tropes, sort of pull them down into the weeds and into the mud, not into the weeds, into the mud, the muck, and ask, what would it really be like if people could ride dragons or come back from the dead, right? This will be very high fantasy if you've not seen some of these ideas, but it will tie into everything that's in the story. So this is the backstory. This is the world behind the world. And I've got some new theories as well, so don't think you've heard it all. You haven't. We've got slides. I've got a slide for each point. So as we go through this bad boy, there's going to be a lot of art. Of course, as always, I will tell you who the artists are. So for example, this is the Great Empire of the Dawn. These are the borders. I started you on the first slide, but we're basically told the Great Empire of the Dawn controlled all the land east of the Bones, west of the Grey Waste, south of the Shivering Sea, and north of the Jade Sea. So I have darkened those areas, which leaves basically all of Essos, all of Eastern Essos that is habitable, worth living in. The question is whether or not Asshai is part of the Great Empire of the Dawn. I have included it on this map because it kind of sounds like it is, and the research leads us to believe that it is so. That part is a little bit theoretical. This is essentially the Great Empire of the Dawn. So that's what we're talking about. These are the ancient Asshai dragon lords. Even if you don't like the name Great Empire of the Dawn, or you disagree with linking the Great Empire of the Dawn stuff to ancient Asshai, it starts with the idea that dragons come from Asshai. And this is introduced in A Game of Thrones. Dany's dragon's eggs are said to come from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. So whether they do or not, they don't. They come from Westeros. We know that now. But the point is, it's a lie that sounds believable. Asshai is a place where dragons' eggs could come from. Then later, where Dany's wondering if dragons are still alive, if magic is still around, they talk about, well, maybe in Karth or maybe in Asshai. There are rumors of magic, rumors of dragons. Bran has that vision where he sees dragons stirring beneath the sunrise as he looks east to Asshai. So George, in A Game of Thrones, is telling us dragons and Asshai might be a thing. Okay, then we meet Quaithe in the second book. She's very interested in Dany's dragons and sees Dany as this prophetic figure. And of course, she is from Asshai. She is a Shadowbinder from Asshai. And she has knowledge about Dany's dragons. So this is where it starts. Dragons, they seem to come from Asshai. And this is Philip Ehrlich, Shadowlands, this artwork. This is actually of the Shadowlands. This is not some random fantasy artwork. This is specifically the Shadowlands of Asshai with dragons. That's what this is, Philip Ehrlich. So, Septon Barth. In the World of Ice and Fire. And the World of Ice and Fire came out in 2014. That's where so much of this comes together. There are certain clues that are there before that, but that is where George really starts feeding us the information. And we'll talk about the Danes. They're another big sort of early clue about all of this. So Septon Barth, in the World of Ice and Fire, there's a passage about where did the Valyrians learn to tame dragons? And one of the possibilities that he offers up, based on old books from Asshai, is that men from the Shadow, meaning the Shadowlands, first taught the Valyrians the art of dragon riding before disappearing from the annals of history. So right there, we're given this idea that the Valyrians have a connection to Asshai. Not only do dragons also happen to be there, there's a specific connection to Valyria. Maybe. Now, how do you teach someone to ride a dragon? Well, you have to turn them into lizard people, and we'll get there. We'll get there, don't worry. But for now, we'll just stick with the idea that men from Asshai may have taught the Valyrians their arts. So then we've got, this question arises, well, who are these Asshai people if they knew how to train dragons and existed before Valyria? Now we're getting into the territory of proto-Valyrians. Right? Predecessors of the Valyrians. Yeah, Lonk the Lunk, that's very ancient aliens with the advanced civilization sharing technology and power and then leaving. Yes. And George loves that. Grey King is like that. We're going to talk about Azor Ahai, the civilizer of the Sarnori. There's a few figures that are like that. So now we've got this idea that maybe ancient Asshai are predecessors of Valyria, that they are proto-Valyrians. And like I said, there's also those Danes lurking around. So this is Atlantis Morset's Gemstone Emperors. Oh, the men from the shadow is Enrique Murguia. Sorry. Enrique Murguia. And of course, this is, you can see their statues. Those are the men from the shadow. The Gemstone Emperors. Maybe that's them. All right, so the Gemstone Emperors, this is where it all comes together. In the world of Ice and Fire, we're told about the Great Empire of the Dawn, and their emperors have eyes that correspond to gemstones. There's 8 of them listed. But the thing is that back in a Game of Thrones, we already saw these damn people. And I don't know if George imagined them as Great Empire of the Dawn, but they don't seem like Valyrians. So I think George is already thinking about proto-Valyrians from Asshai at this point. If not the specific name, Great Empire of the Dawn, but definitely the concept. And here's the quote. This is from Dany's Wake the Dragon Dream, right before she hatches the dragons when she's sort of unconscious in the tent. Ghosts lined the hallway dressed in the faded raiment of kings. In their hands were swords of pale fire. They had hair of silver and gold, and hair of platinum white, and their eyes were opal and amethyst, tourmaline and jade. Faster, they cried, faster. She raced, her feet melting the stone wherever they touched. A great knife of pain ripped down her back, and she felt her skin tear open and smelled the stench of burning blood and saw the shadow of wings. And Daenerys Targaryen flew. Wake the dragon. So who are these kingly ghosts? That's the question. You know, at this point in the story in A Game of Thrones, we don't have the Great Empire of the Dawn information. So we notice that they all have Valyrian hair, but only one has purple eyes, the amethyst one. The other ones have different color eyes. So we might be wondering, oh, did the Valyrians actually not all have purple eyes? Maybe they had different color eyes. But these are obviously some sort of ancestors to Dany. They have swords of pale fire, so something about Lightbringer, and they want Dany to wake the dragon. So are these ancient Valyrians? Are these ancient Asshai? There's something like that. At this point in the story, that's what we're thinking. But we're obviously thinking of Lightbringer, Azor Ahai, and all that stuff. Well, actually, no, I take that back. We don't even have the Azor Ahai prophecy yet. It's at the beginning of Clash of Kings that we get the Azor Ahai prophecy. So at that point, we should be looking back at the pale fire swords and being like, Now, we might be thinking of Dawn at this point, because Dawn is, although it's not said to light up with fire, there's a section in A Game of Thrones when Bran is going to sleep, and he's thinking about Arthur Dayne and Ned's story, the Tower of Joy. And he said, he was dreaming of swords alive with starfire or something like that. So there's definitely the implication that Dawn can be a fire sword. So we see these swords of pale fire. You might think of Dawn. And by book 2, we're thinking of Lightbringer. And they want her to wake the dragon. So that makes sense. They're urging Dany to fulfill her prophecy, her prophetic destiny, I should say. So thank you, Atlantis Morset, who custom made this artwork for me, or, based on the Great Empire of the Dawn essays. So shout out to Atlantis. The point here with the connecting the gemstone eyes of Dany's vision to the Great Empire of the Dawn is the Great Empire of the Dawn, again, there are 8 famous rulers: Tourmaline Emperor, Amethyst Empress, Opal Emperor, Bloodstone Emperor. They're all tied to gemstones. So these 4 gems, Opal, Amethyst, Tourmaline, and Jade, those are 4 of the 8. So these sound like Great Empire of the Dawn emperors now. And specifically the one with amethyst eyes sounds like a perfect Valyrian. So now we're thinking, okay, the Valyrians, they did come from the Great Empire of the Dawn. The Amethyst Empress, is that one person or is that a clan? Is that a tribe of people with purple eyes? And so do the Valyrians descend from the Amethyst Empress? These are the thoughts that we're having. So fused stone is next. Fused stone is important. We've got this potential link between the Great Empire of the Dawn and these ghosts that Dany saw. Dany's ghosts, they have Valyrian hair, so they could be dragon lords, but they don't have dragons, so we don't know that. They have pale fire swords. That's suggestive of Lightbringer, which is kind of associated with dragons. However, there's these things called the Five Forts. So you see right under the E in Empire, the last E, you see the Five Forts under the Bleeding Sea. It's cutting off this open plain that goes to the Grey Waste here. And it's said that they were constructed by the Opal Emperor to keep out the demons of the Lion of Night, which we have no idea what those are. They could be others or some other monsters. The Grey Waste is full of monsters. That's right. That's why Grey Waste Tim is such a dynamo to fight all the monsters in said Grey Waste. That's how that works. So these Five Forts, they function kind of like the Wall. They're built to keep the monsters out. They're like 1,000 feet tall, or just really tall. Who knows? It's probably an exaggeration. But they're made all of fused stone, 100%. The walls, everything, fused black stone, no seam. We know what that is. That's created with dragonfire and sorcery. And let me put this back up. Fused stone, it's called Dragonstone sometimes. That the name Dragonstone Island takes its name from the stone. So the entire castle of Dragonstone built from fused stone. And what this is it's the Valyrians, it's the way they made their castles. They used dragons to heat the stone to a molten state. They used sorcery to shape it. Aeromancy, I don't know what, but somehow with source, because you can't touch molten stone. But they used magic to shape it into fanciful shapes, dragons and all sorts of things. And then again, sorcery to harden it in place. So all these, bedrock, whatever they used to start with, it's fused into one substance with no seam. So it requires dragonfire and sorcery. That's the important thing. And the Five Forts are huge. So this is the kind of thing that only the Valyrians could build, so far as we know. You'd need lots of dragons, an entire civilization of dragon lords, to build 5 huge fortresses. And so this is kind of the smoking gun proof that somebody in the Far East was controlling dragons before the Valyrians, because the Valyrians never came out this far. There's no connection between the Valyrians and anything this far east, especially the Five Forts. They were said, Opal Emperor is like the second or third. So this is very ancient in the Great Empire of the Dawn history. So this basically shows us the Great Empire of the Dawn. These were the proto-dragon lords, the proto-Valyrians from Asshai that we've been looking for. That's them. And of course, again, we notice the parallel with the Wall, which is interesting because, of course, Azor Ahai, to the extent his legends have anything to do with Westeros, it's all about Lightbringer and defeating the Long Night, defeating the others. Melisandre seems to think Stannis is Azor Ahai, and so he needs to go to the Wall and fight the others. So there's Jon has his Azor Ahai dream. He's defending the Wall against whites. It's interesting. Dragon lords building fortresses as a barrier against monsters. Well, that's... Again, it makes us think of Azor Ahai having something to do with the Wall, fighting the others. It's a pretty obvious parallel. So, file that away, parallel to Night's Watch, and, again, proves that Dragon Lords existed in the Far East. Now we know who they are, because we can match the gemstone eyes of Dany's kingly ghost to the gemstone empress. And we're rolling. We've got a theory. Amethyst Empress loyalists. These are the folks. I'm mostly talking about the Danes and Hightowers. Dany and Jon are in here too as Valyrians, but let's talk about the Danes. That's really what we're here to do. Does fused stone itself have any magical properties like dragonglass? Not that we know of. And it doesn't seem to be toxic like oily stone either. It's just made with sorcery. And then it's permanent. It's actually unclear. The Valyrian roads that are made of fused stone are said to be unbreakable and unmarred. However, the storm that came when Dany was born was said to have torn gargoyles off the parapets of Dragonstone, which is made of fused stone. So I think that's a little sloppy writing from George, to be honest. I think fused stone is supposed to be unbreakable, and he wrote the bit about the storm very early in the story and just wanted it to seem like a crazy storm, and that's what he did. Okay, so the woman in the middle is Amethyst Empress by Ownix. Several other of these images are by Bella Bergholtz, and there is one by Mobo Bohm, which is Arthur Dayne on the bottom. That's Mobo Bohm. Te Iku did Jon, Edric Storm is Elaus. The rest are Bella Bergholtz. So basically, Amethyst Empress in the center, Ashara Dayne below her to the left, Dany to the right with her short hair. That's Arthur Dayne on the far right, Gerald Dayne on the far left, Jon in the upper left, and Edric Storm in the upper right. So the Danes, well, first of all, Great Empire of the Dawn. They've got a sword called Dawn. The name Dane sounds like Dawn. That sword, we're going to get into it in a minute, but it's anachronistic. It doesn't belong. There's nothing else like it in ancient Westeros. The first men, so far as we know, weren't capable of making steel, let alone magic steel. So there's a mystery here. There always has been a mystery with the Danes. And they have Valyrian looks. So Arthur Dayne, we don't know what he looked like, but Ashara Dayne, laughing purple eyes. Darkstar looks like a dragon lord, has silver hair and very dark purple eyes. Edric Dayne has blue eyes that look purple in certain lights, and his hair is ash, which is kind of metallic tan, if you will. And George has said specifically the Targaryens have not married into House Dayne. They're not related to the Targaryens. So we have this weird house in southern Westeros with this really old magic sword. They look kind of like Valyrians, but they're not Valyrians. So this has always been more evidence that there are dragon lords that come before Valyria, a common ancestor of the Danes and the Valyrians. Now we have the Great Empire of the Dawn. We know who that is, right? So here's the thing. The Danes supposedly followed a star to get to Westeros. So they are immigrants. They came from somewhere else. That fits the story. It also fits the story of the Númenóreans from the Lord of the Rings. And I can't tell you this whole theory right now. You want to watch Great Empire of the Dawn Westeros for the 50-minute breakdown. But essentially, the Númenóreans were an advanced race of humans. They lived on an island of Númenor that was over to the west of Middle-earth. And it was sunken in an Atlantis-like calamity, right? The good Númenóreans, the faithful, fled to Middle-earth. Those are Aragorn's descendants. And they were called the Edain, and then later the Dunedain. But it's spelled, it looks like Dunedain or Edain. It's A-I-N, even though it's said Dunedain and Edain. But let's just say the Edains for now. So the Edains fled from an advanced culture from the west. They have the magic sword. That's the one that is reforged. Aragorn's sword. That's a really old sword. That's the one that slew Sauron's finger or whatever. They brought that from Númenor, okay? So there's all these parallels between the Danes fleeing the Great Empire of the Dawn and the Edain fleeing the Númenóreans with this magic sword. They both have all this Venus morning star symbolism. So yes, Narsil, thank you. Narsil had an older name, did it not? Or no, it got a new name after it was reforged. That's what it was. Andoril, the Flame of the West, after it was reforged. So the parallels are very heavy. The Danes also, the Danes followed the Morning Star to get to Middle-earth, or did they follow it to get to Númenor? I forget. One of the oldest elves that is tied with the founding of Númenor was turned into the Morning Star in Tolkien lore. So there's a lot of Venus folklore connections. But point is, the Danes are the Númenóreans, and that would imply that they came from the Great Empire of the Dawn, that the sword Dawn comes from the Great Empire of the Dawn. It also may imply that they sailed east from Asshai and went around the other way and landed on Westeros from the west, because the Númenóreans came from the west. We're going to talk about that later. But they could have gone either way. Even if they came the normal way through the Sunset Sea, they would have come before the Hammer of the Waters broke the arm of Dorne. And that means they couldn't, there's no access to the Narrow Sea. Dorne has no safe anchorages. So let me actually pull up the map. Okay. So the arm of Dorne, before it's broken, there's nowhere to land anywhere in Dorne. So if you're sailing through the Summer Sea, and again, the Great Empire of the Dawn left descendants in Valyria, the ancient Valyrians, maybe they just fled there from the Great Empire of the Dawn, but maybe that was already a colony. So they could have come this way, but you can't land anywhere in Dorne. So the first place you get to land at is Starfall. And the next place you get to is Old Town. And Old Town and Starfall are the places that are most clearly Great Empire of the Dawn colonies. We just talked about the Danes. We're going to get into the High Towers in a minute, but it's flat out said that ancient mariners came to Old Town and hung out on Battle Isle that weren't first men. Those are the Great Empire of the Dawn. So they either sailed the other way around and landed on the west coast of Westeros because they came from the Sunset Sea, or they landed at Starfall and Old Town because the arm was connected, so you can't get to the Narrow Sea, and there's no good harbor in Dorne. Oh yes, Uthor Dragonslayer. Okay, so we're talking about really the High Towers and the Danes here at once in this slide. So we just talked about the Danes, the High Towers, the Battle Isle stuff. There's extensive stuff on Battle Isle. We mentioned the Fused Stone earlier, the 5 forts. Well, the big proof that the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros, really, besides all the rumors and the Númenórean connections, is that there is a Fused Stone fortress under the High Tower. So there's Battle Isle's a rock built in the bay of Whispering Sound. The tower, the High Tower, is built on top of this Fused Stone fortress that's on top of this rock. We're going to come to this later, but this is the High Tower. So this shows you, this is Battle Isle. You can see the darker fortress on the bottom, black and seamless. This is the idea. There's this old Fused Stone fortress, and then all the versions of the High Tower. And remember, there's several versions that are built on top of this thing. And the Fused Stone fortress, again, it's proof that Dragon Lords were here in the remotest antiquity, before the first High Towers. Or maybe they were the first High Towers. There's rumors that the first High Tower slew the dragons that were roosting on the walls of this fortress. So not only is it Fused Stone, there's literal legends about dragons that used to roost on this island. And the first High Tower slew them. So, this is not cryptic anymore. This is direct legends associated with the place. The name of the first High Tower is Uthor High Tower. This is a clear shout out to Uther Pendragon, who's the father of King Arthur. Pen means head, as in ponce, the French word ponce, to think. So pen means head dragon. That house had a dragon on their sigil, King Arthur's house. And basically, Uthor Pendragon is the head dragon because he's the head of the house. But in some versions of the Arthurian tales, there's also a dragon under the castle that Merlin goes and talks to, right? Uthor Pendragon is a dragon name, both in the name and in the association. So when you say Uthor High Tower, well, was there a dragon roosting under his castle? Yes. Yes, he settled a castle made of fused stone that has caverns. The tunnels in the Fused Stone fortress are like twisting tunnels. So they may have been dug by dragons. We've seen that dragons can burrow into the rock, just like fireworms can. And the first High Towers lived in those twisted halls before they built the tower. So these really sound like dragon lords living down in the caves of the Fused Stone fortress. And indeed, that's exactly what I think they were. Now, the looks of the High Towers, this is a little more cryptic, but they might have Valyrian looks too. We've only seen a couple High Towers. Allery High Tower is one of Marjorie's ladies. She has silver hair, and she's less than 30 years old. Now, some people do have silver hair at a very young age. They look really cool too. It's like, shout out to y'all. But it could be that Allery's silver hair is Valyrian hair because she's not old. Then there are, let's see, what's the other? There's one other High Tower clue about having dragon looks. Oh yes, Lyness, thank you. So Lyness High Tower looks just like Dany. Jorah says that not just like, but a bit. Dany reminds him of Lyness High Tower. Now that's important on a narrative level because Jorah's transferring his heartbreak of Lyness onto Dany, right? But it also tells you that there is at least some similarities to the looks. I mean, maybe they're just both beautiful and Lyness High Tower was blonde, but it would make sense if the High Towers, just like the Danes, have some sort of Valyrian looks running around. I believe that will be revealed in the next book. This is Hennig Ludvigsson. This is obviously Arthur Dayne. Hennig is smart and figured out that Arthur Dayne might look Valyrian. So even though we never get a description of Arthur Dayne, Hennig has drawn him as a Valyrian, which could be right. The sword, specifically, I mentioned the sword. It doesn't belong. It's anachronistic. That means it's ahead of the technology of its times. It doesn't really belong in ancient Westeros. It didn't come out of the forge of a first man. They don't have anything else like this. They're using bronze weapons, not steel. This is a magic star sword. So the name, obviously, Great Empire of the Dawn. But the Venus symbolism is really more important. we're talking about Lightbringer here. Lightbringer is a legend from the East, right? Azor Ahai, he comes from the East. His legend is from Asshai. The Great Empire of the Dawn story has Azor Ahai coming in at the end of it to defeat the armies and demons of the Long Night and restore peace to the world. And there's even different names of Azor Ahai that are all from the East, except for Eldrick Shadowchaser. We'll talk about him. So Lightbringer's from the East. The Danes are from somewhere else. Their sword is a magic sword. It's called Dawn. Lightbringer, Dawn, like Dawn literally is when the sun rises and brings the light back. We're trying to end the long night. So you might name a sword that helped end the long night Dawn. This is not rocket science. However, Lucifer means Lightbringer, as we know. This is one of my first discoveries. The name Lucifer is a Latin word for Venus. Forget the devil stuff for a minute. That came later. Originally, it's a Latin word for Venus when it's in its morning star position. Because as you know, Venus is a planet, but it looks like a star. It looks like the brightest star in the sky. And for 250 days or so, it rises in the morning, just before the sun rises into the sky. Then the sun rises and Venus seems to disappear. So it's ascending, disappearing. That's the morning star. Then it flips, and it's the first star in the evening, where it appears low on the horizon and then sinks down like a falling star, like Lucifer being kicked out of heaven, or Jesus coming down to earth. So you have this ascending and descending thing with the morning star, and it's the usher of the day or the usher of the night. And so in House Dayne, we have the sword of the morning, but then there was also a dude named Dayne who was the sword of the evening. So we see George reflecting that Venus idea of both morning and evening. But the name Lightbringer, this is the thing. Lucifer, the Latin word for Venus, when it's the morning star, Lucifer can be translated as several phrases. One of them is Lightbringer, or bringer of light, or light bearer. And another one is son of the morning, because Venus is a son of the morning. And often when you know, God the Father or the Father God in many mythologies is associated with the sun, a lot of times Venus ends up being the son of God or a prophet of God, some figure like that. So Jesus is associated with the morning star and God the Father associated with the sun in the Bible. And that fits Jesus because he comes down to earth and then ascends back to heaven. Lucifer, the biblical Lucifer, also compared to the morning star because he's kicked out of heaven for challenging God. The challenging is the rising action. Being kicked out is the falling action. So, what am I saying? The name Lightbringer refers to Venus, the morning star. The name Sword of the Morning is adapted from Son of the Morning, and that's also a reference to Venus, the morning star. So is Dawn Lightbringer? Yeah, in some sense, it has to be. I think there's a complexity in there. I think there was 2 Lightbringer swords. But Dawn is definitely one of them. No question. It seems obvious, and the more you look into it and dive into the mythology, the more true it seems. So it's true in some sense, but like I said, there's a twist. So it's not as easy as, well, we just got to go knock on the door at Starfall and get Dawn, and then Jon can win the fight against the others, and then we all go home. That's obviously not how it's going to go. But this was some magic sword associated with the original Long Night. There's no doubt. And it's in the hands of these people who don't belong in Westeros and came here following a falling star. So you see how this ties back to the Great Empire of the Dawn. So remember, Dawn is made from a pale stone, a meteorite. So it's a meteor sword. But magic meteors, it's not just Dawn, the Bloodstone Emperor. So this artwork, this is from a video game, Lineage 2. This is not the actual Bloodstone Emperor, but it's the most Bloodstone Emperor looking art that I've seen. This is the Long Night ruler of the Great Empire of the Dawn. I skipped over this, but essentially the Great Empire of the Dawn is cruising along. The ages of their emperors are getting shorter. They're in decline. And then the Bloodstone Emperor comes along. He's the younger brother of the Amethyst Empress, but he kills her and usurps her place and declares himself the Bloodstone Emperor. And that act is so evil that it causes the sun to hide its face. So we're killing a woman, and then that caused a long night. But of course, Azor Ahai stabbed Nissa, and then that broke the moon. And breaking the moon is, in my opinion, the cause of the long night. We'll get to that in a second. But we've got these potentially parallel myths. Azor Ahai kills Nissa, the moon breaks. And this is during the long night, supposedly. But then Bloodstone Emperor, to cause the long night, also kills a woman. So there's a lot of woman stabbing going on here.
And indeed, I think Nissa and the Amethyst Empress, one and the same. Bloodstone Emperor and Azor Ahai, one and the same. That's what this boils down to. The wrinkle in this is there also could be a title thing. So Bloodstone Emperor, Azor Ahai, father, son, maybe it's a title. You know, we're not getting too specific here with our theorizing. But point is, the long night, as I'm about to explain, caused by meteor impacts. And we've got this guy who took power during the long night. What is he doing? He's worshiping a meteor, right? And he's called the Bloodstone Emperor. But bleeding stars, that's what we call meteors and comets, bleeding stars. So if it's a bleeding star in the sky, on the ground, it's going to be a bloody stone. And that means that he was named after his space rock that he worshipped. So it's a very important space rock. We can assume it's magical. We can assume he took power from it, and it may be the key to his whole thing, okay? The Bleeding Star Emperor. Now, like I said, along comes Azor Ahai at the end of his story with the magic sword. So we've got a meteor, a black meteor in the hands of the Bloodstone Emperor, and then shortly after, Lightbringer and Azor Ahai. And over with the Danes, we've got Dawn, which could be Lightbringer, made from a meteor. So we're starting to see some parallels here. Maybe it's the same meteor and the same sword. Maybe there's a black meteor and a white meteor. Who knows? But because we've got all that oily black stone, which is kind of meteorite looking. So, you know, Asshai is made all of oily black stone. I skipped over that. This guy worships a black stone. Asshai is made of oily black stone. And I've connected the Great Empire of the Dawn and Asshai. So this has to do with meteors. All of that oily black stone, I think, was created by the meteor impact, and we'll get into that too. I'm going to show you more evidence that Azor Ahai and the Bloodstone Emperor are the same person. But we have to go to Moon Meteor Talk to do that. So let's do. This is the Geminid meteor shower photo by Wally Pacholka. You can see the whole star sword thing here, right? Like, just stick a hilt on this, and you've got a star. I mean, you've got a sword. So it's falling stars. They really do look like swords. And George is not the first person to think of fantasy star swords. They've got them in Tolkien as well. We'll get to that. But the point is, as we think about what could have caused the long night, forget about the moon. We're not there yet. We're just looking for what could have caused the long night. Meteors are the obvious pick. There's only 3 things that can cover the earth in clouds and hide the sun for years. You've got an impact winter, a volcanic winter, or a nuclear winter. Now, around here, we do not buy the theory that A Song of Ice and Fire used to be a scientifically modern world and all the magic is technology. That is not the case. We don't do that here. So there's no nuclear winter. Now, volcanic winter, the Doom of Valeria is the biggest fantasy volcano eruption you could imagine. And in George's mind, it did not cause a global darkness. So that's probably not it. The meteors are everywhere in the legends. So there's Dawn, the Dawn meteor. There's the Bloodstone Emperor meteor. So that's 2. We've got Hugor of the Hill, the founder of the Andals. 7 stars were pulled down from heaven to make his crown. So there's more falling stars. The Grey King, there was a mighty thunderbolt struck down from the storm god that set a tree ablaze and gave him fire of the gods like Prometheus. That could be a falling star. There's also a sea dragon that he slew that drowns whole islands. If meteors can be dragons, which they can be, a folkloric description of a meteor can be a dragon, both in A Song of Ice and Fire and in the real world. Then a sea dragon that drowns islands could be a meteor that falls into the sea and causes tidal waves. We're going to talk about the Hammer of the Waters in a minute. I feel like I'm forgetting a big one. Galadon of Morn, the maiden herself, who's associated with one of the 7 celestial wanderers, lost her heart to Galadon like Nissa and gave him a magic sword. So that kind of sounds like a star sword myth. So there's all these legends of stars and falling stars. Oh yes, the Azor Ahai legends. It's right there on the screen. Azor Ahai is prophesied to return, to be reborn under the bleeding star. So that's the comet. But Melisandre also speaks of a different prophecy. But instead of saying when the bleeding star comes again, the wording is, in ancient Asshai it is written that there will come a day after a long summer when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavily on the world. So now we have plural stars that are bleeding, meaning streaking. So it kind of slips by the wayside, but Azor Ahai is prophesied to return with a meteor shower. So there will be a meteor shower, and then there will be a long night. I mean, it's right There. Oops. Demonetized. So when the stars bleed, the long night will come again. And in that dread hour, a warrior shall draw from the fire a burning sword. And that sword shall be Lightbringer. Okay? So, bleeding stars, falling stars, meteorites, meteor swords, they're all over the place. So even before you get my... Cleo, you're killing me. Come here. So even before you get my specific theory, which I'm going to lay out in a second about the moon meteors, you should be looking around and noticing there's a lot of meteor legends. Maybe the long night was caused by a meteor. Even the others, who are the demons of the long night, they have star eyes, right? It's said so many times, eyes like blue stars, eyes like blue stars. So they are themselves like a meteor shower. They are an invasion of hostile blue stars with crystalline swords that look just like the picture you see in front of you. That is how the sword of the other will look. Alive with moonlight, glowing, a shard of crystal. Okay? So these stargazing others, these star-eyed crystal sword demons that come during the long night, they basically parallel the meteor shower itself that Mel was just prophesying. So definitely we should be thinking about meteors and stars here. Like, this is just going with the basic levels first and then building up. Next is the moon thing. So where do the bleeding stars come from? Well, they come from the moon. There's two legends about it. Dany hears one in a Game of Thrones. Once there was a second moon in the sky, so two moons we used to have, but it wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat, and it drank the fire of the sun. And basically the moon was like an egg, and it said it cracked open and dragons came out from the moon, just like you see in this picture by Paul Ewell. And it said the dragons, they drank the fire of the sun, and that's why they breathed flame. So it's a weird myth. It's kind of nonsensy. The dragons in Ice and Fire did not fly down from the moon. Now, in Lovecraft, there are things that fly down from the moon. There's ships that can sail from the moon, and there's dark beings that run those ships, and there's also cats that can leap straight to the dark side of the moon, the cats of Ulthar. So George is playing with Lovecraftian ideas of stuff coming from the moon, but no, the dragons did not come from the moon. These are meteors. If the moon cracked, if it suffered any sort of calamity, pieces of the moon would chip off, fall to Earth, be pulled into our gravity, and we would get moon meteors. And of course, this has happened. There are pieces of moon on the Earth that have fallen down. Moon rocks, moon meteors, they happen. So we've got this legend about sounds like an eclipse. When you say the moon wandered too close to the sun, the only way you can even see the moon in the sky at the same time as the sun is if it's a day moon and it's on the opposite side of the sky, or if it's an eclipse and the moon literally is superimposed over the sun. And that's what wandering too close to the sun sounds like. So it sounds like there was an eclipse and then something happened to the moon and it cracked and dragons came from the moon. But like I said, in mythology and in A Song of Ice and Fire, you can conflate meteors and dragons. The red comet is a dragon's tail, okay? And in Chinese and Sumerian folklore, we see dragons, meteors and comets described as dragons. It's not hard to see why. The meteors fly, they land with a roar, they burn everything and destroy everything where they land. So, kind of like dragons. But then we have a second myth about the moon cracking, and that one is tied directly to the long night. And that is the Azor Ahai Nissa Nissa legend. Azor Ahai stabs Nissa Nissa to forge Lightbringer. Her cry of agony and ecstasy leaves a crack across the face of the moon. And that's all it said. It didn't say anything about dragons coming from the moon. But it says the moon was cracked when Lightbringer was forged during the long night. Now, forget about the specifics because these are 8,000-year-old legends. We should expect the details to be shuffled around. There is a moon cracking around the time of the long night in the Azor Ahai legend. Then the Carthene legend, which is also from the east, and Carth is a very ancient city, which we'll talk about. They have a legend about there used to be a second moon. A very old legend. Something happened to this moon and it cracked and it's no more. So whatever, it's not there anymore. It could be hidden. It could be damaged and small and further out. Maybe it's around. Maybe the remnant of the moon turned into the new red comet. That is a possibility we can talk about. But it's gone. Something happened to it. It's not there. We only have one moon now. So There was an ancient moon disaster because we have 2 legends, 2 witnesses, 2 accounts of the moon cracking. And so when we're looking for the source of all these bleeding stars or something that could cause a long night, here it is. The moon cracked, some moon rocks fell to Earth. This was during the long night, and these things that fell like dragons caused so much destruction that ash, debris, and smoke thrown into the atmosphere covered over the entire Earth or the northern hemisphere and blotted out the sun. And that's the long night. So how did the moon break? That's the last question. Did the moon just break? Was it an eclipse? Did the eclipse break it? No, eclipses don't break moons, obviously. That part is silly. The moon wandered too close to the sun. The moon cracked from the heat of the sun. Well, that doesn't really make sense. An eclipse only looks like the moon is close to the sun. It's not really touching. So the sun didn't crack the moon, at least not by direct contact. However, that's where the mythical astronomy starts. So the Azor Ahai myth is actually an alchemical myth, meaning it's an as above, so below myth. Nissa represents the moon. When she dies, the moon dies. Okay. Azor Ahai is obviously a solar king. Melisandre speaks about him as such, the warrior of fire. He's going to bring the return of the sun. The sun is R'hllor's, and he is R'hllor's champion. Stannis as Azor Ahai wears a flaming crown. So very obviously a solar king figure, Azor Ahai. Nissa, like I said, even her name, Nissa, the doubled name, she represents the second moon. Okay, so Azor Ahai stabs Nissa with what? With Lightbringer. And then the moon cracks when Nissa is killed. So if Azor Ahai represents the sun, how can the sun stab the moon with Lightbringer? Well, the comet is compared directly to Lightbringer a bunch of times in many ways. So what if it was actually a comet that hit the moon while it was in this eclipse position in front of the sun? That would look like the sun stabbing the moon with a comet sword, or Azor Ahai, the Sun King, stabbing Nissa with Lightbringer. It's the same story. As above, so below. Last part of it is Dany at the when she hatches the dragons. So her and Drogo are a parallel to the Qartheen myth, where the sun and moon wandered too close together, and then the moon cracks like an egg and the dragons are born. Well, Drogo is, my sun and stars. Dany says it over and over. And Dany is the moon of Drogo's life. And the Dothraki believe the sun and moon are gods and that they're married. So they translate that relationship onto the Khal and the Khaleesi. The Khaleesi is the moon, Drogo is the sun. So when Dany wakes the dragons, the Sun King is set on fire, and she wanders too close to the fire of the sun. And then the dragons hatch, and she carries the eggs into the pyre. So Dany the moon and her dragon's eggs are kind of the same symbol because the moon was an egg. She's the mother of the dragons. If you look at the whole moon is the mother. When the moon is broken apart into the moon dragons, those are the children, okay? So Dany as the moon wanders too close to Drogo's fire, literally walks into his fire, and then the eggs crack open. They're stone eggs, just like the moon is made of stone, and the dragons emerge. So it's a parallel to the myth. And what happens right before Dany walks into the pyre? The red comet appears, the dragon's tail. That's the sign. And then she imagines that that's Drogo's star and that Drogo turns into the red comet. So it's like, oh, that's Drogo's comet. Also, there's a sexual allusion with Azor stabbing Nissa to create something. That is reproduction language, the bloody sword, the impregnating penis. Barbary Dustin gives the lecture in A Dance with Dragons, famously. So Azor Ahai and Nissa probably had children. That child is like the Grail child, the magic bloodline. That child is Lightbringer, in a way. Same thing in the sky. The sun is impregnating the moon with the comet, with the starseed. And then the moon gives birth to little baby comets, the meteors. So you can see how it's all parallel with the reproduction or creating dragons. If you want the symbolism, check out the Lightbringer series. I gave you the taste of it, but basically that's what's going on. The sun and the moon up in the sky, doing the celestial tango. They birthed dragon meteors. They were bits of moon, but they were on fire like the sun. And when they landed, they turned out the lights. So now we have the meteors, we've got where they came from, the moon, and we've got the cause of all of it, the comet. So going back to the hatching of the dragons with Dany, Drogo has already stabbed Dany with his comet because he's gotten her pregnant with Rhaego. And Rhaego dies right before this, but Rhaego's death is seen as part of the sacrifice that pays for the waking of the dragons. And one of the dragons is named Rhaegal. Another one is named Drogon. So Drogo, he is the father of the dragons and is reborn as a dragon, just as Dany is the mother of dragons and herself is a dragon. So, folks, like I said, quite possible that we're dealing with two swords here, two Lightbringer swords. We've got the entire Dawn mythology, where it's a pale meteor and a white sword. But the Valyrians have all these black swords. And the Valyrians come from the Great Empire of the Dawn. It's their entire culture comes from them. And we see a lot of remnants of the Bloodstone Emperor's dark magic in Valyrian culture. Valyrian steel almost surely is made with blood magic. What does that mean? Human sacrifice. Well, they're probably just emulating the Lightbringer recipe, where you temper the sword in the heart of a human sacrifice. Lightbringer is a magic sword made with blood magic. Valyrian steel swords are magic swords made with blood magic. The Bloodstone Emperor worshipped a black meteor. Was the first black sword made from the Bloodstone Emperor's black meteor? The answer is yes. I promise you the answer is yes. I don't know if we'll ever see that sword, that first black sword, but it's pretty obvious we've got this dichotomy. All the black swords of the Targaryens versus this white sword Dawn. And there's even a suggestion that, Daemon Blackfire with Blackfire in hand could even best Ulrich Dayne with Dawn in hand. So you have this creation of this archetypical sword fight, a sword of the morning with Dawn and a dragon man with a black sword. So I do think that is a thing. So one of the big influences for Lightbringer is, of course, Stormbringer. Stormbringer is Elric's sword. Elric of Melniboné. You can see him on the left. He looks like young Bloodraven. He's got red eyes. He's an albino. He's sick and emaciated. He's got white hair, but he takes drugs all the time and uses magic to sustain himself. And he's got this black sword called Stormbringer, and it's actually called a rune sword. And when it activates with magic, it lights up with black fire, and the runes glow red. So, what's the name of the ancestral sword of House Targaryen? Blackfire. The idea of a sword of black fire comes directly from Stormbringer. And the Valyrians, I should say, the Valyrians are the Melnibonéans. Elric is half-elf. The Melnibonéans are half-elven, and they are a sort of race of superior men, much like the Númenóreans, but darker. The Melnibonéans are very corrupt. They're written like the Valyrians. They enslave other people. They sit around on their dreaming couches doing drugs and just considering themselves far superior to everyone else. They have these cities that are incredible. They ride dragons. So they are the Dragon Lord civilization. They live on an island, and they are corrupt. And Elric actually passes judgment on his own civilization. I think George used that with Aenar Targaryen in the Doom. That's neither here nor there. The point is, Elric and the Melnibonéans, the number one influence and inspiration for the Valyrians. So, Stormbringer, a black sword with black fire. Was Lightbringer a black sword with black fire, which the Valyrians then remembered and tried to emulate, making more black swords and naming them things like Blackfire? Yes. Yes. Now, here's another thing. Stormbringer has a twin called Mournblade. Mournblade, sword of the morning. Stormbringer, Lightbringer. You see where I'm going with this? So it could be that Dawn is the white sword of the Lightbringer pair, but that there is a twin sword, a black one, and that was the original Lightbringer, the Bloodstone Emperor's black meteor sword. I promise you this is going to be how it turns out. I would love it if Blackfire turned out to be the original Lightbringer, or maybe even Ned's Ice. I always have a joke, when Ned's ancestor went to Valyria or Dragonstone to buy ice, because the Valyrian steel ice is said to be 400 years old from Valyria. But maybe when the ancient Starks went to buy a sword from the Targs on Dragonstone, or when they went to Valyria, I was saying, they had a new clerk at the sales office. And instead of selling him a new Valyrian steel sword, He accidentally grabbed the one from the display case, the old one, the customs shop, and sold that one by mistake. Oops, we sold original Lightbringer to House Stark. And so they've got it. The reason why, the thing is, I'm kind of joking, but Ned's sword is thematically the most important sword in the story. It's the one we're most attached to. It's been through this whole transformation. It was turned into 2 red swords, just like Lightbringer's a red sword. And Arya even compares the comet to ice covered with blood. Comets, of course, are actually largely made of ice and rock. So the idea of a black steel sword called ice is a perfect comet symbol. The comet's ice is in fact all black and covered in black tar, space goo, they call it. So yeah, it's ice, rock, and space tar. That's what a comet is. So Ned's ice is a great comet symbol. Is it the original Lightbringer? Probably not. But could Oathkeeper or Widow's Wail become a new Lightbringer? Yes, I do think so. I think we'll have multiple flaming swords, by the way. All right, so Stormbringer and Mournblade is a clue that there are 2 Lightbringer swords. Then the 5 names of Azor Ahai. Remember, I said there's Azor Ahai, but there's 4 other names. One of them is Eldrick Shadow Chaser, and another one is Hyrkoon the Hero. Well, Eldrick Shadow Chaser, that's 1 letter away from Elric of Melniboné. And Hyrkoon, Hyrkoon, is a slight change of the name of Elric's cousin. So Elric has Stormbringer. His cousin, Irkoon, with a Y, is the one who has Mournblade. So you got these 2 cousins with twin magic swords. They're both black in the story. One is Irkoon, one is Elric. So then George says, oh yeah, there's other names for Azor Ahai, and one of them is Hyrkoon the Hero, and another one is Elric Shadow Chaser. So he's kind of telling you, like, we should think about multiple Azor Ahai people and multiple Azor Ahai swords. He's directly calling out not only to Elric, but to Elric's cousin, who had a twin sword. I don't want to belabor the point. I think I already did. But I love Elric. So there you go. This is Aegon the Conqueror by Aransta Sesteo on the right. And Elric on the left is drawn by Gary Jamraz Palma. So Elric is a major clue that Lightbringer is a black sword. And that there were twin swords. And that Dawn is 1/2 of those swords. I think Night King, there's a whole Night King Azor Ahai stuff. The idea of stealing Dawn, like the others, whoever caused the long night stole the dawn because they prevented the sun from rising again. So it does seem like swords are being stolen. There's also the name Dragonsteel. Could be a pun about stealing dragon swords. So there could be sword swapping. You know, there's the Tower of Joy where Arthur Dayne has Dawn. And then there's on the other side the Grey Wraith Ned. He doesn't have ice with him, but he owns ice. A black sword. So you got black-white sword fight. Then Ned defeats Arthur and takes his sword, Dawn, and brings it back to Starfall. So is that some repeat of an archetypal scenario where somebody defeated someone that had Dawn and took it, and then eventually left it at Starfall after the long night fight was done? We're like, okay, we'll leave it here for safekeeping, you know? Something like that. Oh, and then there's also Anglicel and Angwarel. Those are the 2 meteor swords from Tolkien. They are also black swords. They are made from meteors. They are R2. They are forged by Eol, the dark elf. Later, I think it's Angwarel, is broken and reforged into Gurthang. And Gurthang is better known than these 2. Gurthang is the sword of Turin. Turin Blacksword, as he's called. His name is, named after his black sword. Turin also wore a dragon crown, the dragon crown of Dor Lomond, I think it's called. He killed a dragon with Gurthang, and there's a couple other important parallels. He killed his best friend accidentally with Gurthang. It's kind of an Azor Nissa thing. Gurthang has a spirit, and it likes to drink blood. So Stormbringer also drinks souls. Stormbringer traps souls inside of it. And remember, in the Azor legend, Lightbringer drank Nissa's soul and life force into it. It says her life and soul and spirit went into the steel. So Lightbringer is implied as a soul-sucking sword, just like Gurthang, just like Stormbringer, and also just like there's another black sword in a different fantasy series that drinks souls. And that one is from Ericsson's series. Anomander Rake is the character. He has a black soul drinking sword. All this probably comes from Elric. And also, there's some Norse mythology behind these magic swords as well. Malazan, yes, that's it. That's the series, Malazan. So if any of you read Malazan, Anomander Rake, his black sword is a soul drinker. And that is in this same tradition. So Anglakel and Angwarel, black meteor swords, twins. So just another clue of what's going on here. What's next? Oh, the Shadowlands. This art is by Deziga Kaiser, part of the Unseen Westeros collection of artwork. The Shadowlands. This bleep is bleeped, as you can see on the screen. It's messed up. The whole peninsula, if you remember the map, it's not just a Asshai made of oily stone. The entire peninsula is colored dark purple. We're told nothing grows there but ghost grass, which is this horrible magical weed that just chokes out everything else and probably isn't edible. Somebody's saying Zelda's got a similar thing going on. That's dope. There's a black sword that has souls. Yeah, I mean, you know, fantasy tropes are what they are. They get around. So what happened? That's kind of the question. Like, something is wrong with the Shadowlands. Maybe it's always like that. Maybe it's just all the evil magic that's been there is making it all poison. But it's probably the other way around. It's probably that the evil sorcerers come there to practice dark magic, and that it's a hinge of the world that makes that kind of magic stronger because something bad happened there. And since we know we're looking for meteors, we've got the Bloodstone Emperor worshipped a black meteor. It sounds evil. He's evil. Everything he does is evil. And this is a meteor that seems to have fallen at the time of the Long Night. It's not specifically said, but it's said that during the long, Bloodstone Emperor caused it and then worshipped a black meteor that fell from space. Doesn't say when it fell from space, but it was probably a Long Night meteor that he worshipped. Because a long night is what brought him into power. He may have caused it. He may have specifically done magic to call the comet. There's a lot of talk about calling the comet in the story, so maybe that's a thing you can do. Now, Lovecraft gives us a big clue here. There's a book called The Color Out of Space, and it was turned into a very bad Nicolas Cage movie, like laughably bad. Really bad. Me and Quinn watched it. But the point is, in The Color Out of Space, there's a magic meteor. It lands somebody's yard. It's poisonous, and it leeches all the life from the land. It causes mutations, and in the movie, they lean more on the mutations. In the book, it's more like it turns everything gray and dead. And it's a color that no one can describe. It's like a shifting, oily color. And so the idea of a magic space rock that is toxic and poisons the land, that's from Lovecraft. So when we see this oily black stone at Asshai that sounds a lot like this color that nobody can describe, right? Well, now we can see, probably the Shadowlands was poisoned by one of these type of meteors. And I imagine that Stygian, the shadow city at the heart of the corpse city at the heart of the shadow, is probably a meteor shrine. It is probably a temple built around where this black meteor that the Bloodstone Emperor worshipped landed. So you could picture the Bloodstone Emperor walking up from Asshai, up the caverns to Stygian to perform his necromancy and stuff. Like this is the picture that's being painted here. So we've got evidence of a meteor strike. We've got a guy worshiping a dark meteor. We've got a land covered in shadow. And we've got this black stone. Asshai is built entirely of black stone, the whole city. And Asshai is the largest city in the world by a factor of 4. It can fit Volantis and Karth and King's Landing and Old Town inside of it. It's huge. So look, maybe the Squishers 1,000,000 years ago built this thing out of oily black stone. I could believe that. But human beings don't build cities out of poisonous black stone. This shit is poisonous, okay? Literally, children and animals can't survive here. This is the same stuff at Yin, where the jungle won't grow near the stone. It stops, okay? I've always said that Asshai was probably, if it was the capital of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and we would assume it's the capital because it's so big, and it's built on the end of a peninsula, port cities, obviously prosperous. It's controlling the straits, just like Karth controls straits and has grown rich. Asshai controls the Saffron Straits. So we got this huge city. It's oily stone now, but it's like Use your imagination. Well, this was probably built as a glorious, shining jewel, the capital of the great empire of the Dawn. But once the meteor landed here, we can see that obviously the whole land has been poisoned. So maybe the stone itself became oily black stone, just as the whole peninsula became poisoned. That is what I would guess. Although I do think the squishers thing is also possible, to be honest. So this is a major piece of the puzzle. Asshai, once the whole thing is connecting the idea of the ancient dragon lords from Asshai to the kingly ghosts with the gemstone eyes that Dany sees. Once we do that, and we know that ancient Asshai dragon lords and the great empire of the Dawn are one and the same, then this all fits together. Great empire of the Dawn built infused stone with their dragons, and they had a great capital city at Asshai. But then the Bloodstone Emperor takes over and worships one of these damn long night meteors that falls and poisons the land. So it suits him fine because he's some sort of half-dead necromancer or some shit. So now the world is covered in shadow, and Asshai has been converted to oily black stone, and he is the ultimate Dark Lord. That's the picture here. This is an evil dragon lord. that's the bottom line. Now the thing is, this is all fun in games, but it's far out in the east, and so far it's not very connected to Westeros and the main plot. But again, Battle Isle tells us that the Great Empire of the Dawn was coming to Westeros before everything went bad. So when the Great Empire of the Dawn was still expanding and founding colonies, and we'll talk about why they came to Westeros in a minute, but they came to Westeros and they founded a colony. And I should mention the Phoenicians here. The Phoenicians are a big influence on George. The Phoenicians, of course, traveled the Mediterranean Sea, and they were the best sailors in their day. They are probably the sea peoples of certain legends and mysterious raiders of Greece and Egypt and other countries. And the Phoenicians had a habit of building cities on islands just offshore, of places that they wanted to trade with or conquer. Sidon and Tyre are both like this. They're fortress cities built on islands just offshore. They even built a causeway in one case. But they are sea peoples, so it suits them. They can protect their island with their naval power, and they build a big fortress, and the people on land can't fuck with them. Now, the Valyrians have emulated this pattern. They've done it in several places. Volantis is a walled fortress city built at the very end of a river isthmus. Written that right, Cleo. And then the same is true of Tyrosh, Dragonstone, and I'm not sure if Lys fits the bill as well, but Tyrosh is definitely a fortress city first. Dragonstone is a fortress city on an island. So now we look at, again, Starfall and Battle Isle at Old Town. Starfall is a castle built on an island at the mouth of a river, and so is Battle Isle Fortress. It's a fortress on an island at the mouth of a river. So it seems like that Phoenician pattern has been followed by Valyria and by the Great Empire of the Dawn. And this is just more evidence for Old Town and Starfall being Great Empire of the Dawn colonies. So they're colonizing Westeros, and then the Long Night falls, and their whole empire disintegrates. So these colonies would then be stranded. And we're also told that everybody fled the Great Empire of the Dawn, as one would guess. Bloodstone Emperor's reign of terror, Long Night falls, there's going to be famine and chaos. So people are going to flee. If you have a cousin, if you have relatives, your wife's family is from Nath or something, you're going there, right? We'll talk about all the places that people fled coming up. But Westeros, the Westeros colonies, they would have been potentially isolated and cut off. But it's probably worse than that. There's probably an invasion of Westeros. So in the next section here, we are going to, this big section, we're going to talk about how all of this now connects to Westeros. So this is really going to hit the accelerator. We have been laying the foundations. Most of you guys are pretty familiar with this stuff. Hopefully I gave you a few new spices. But the last piece of this is the Hammer of the Waters. Once you figure out the Long Night was caused by meteors, the Hammer of the Waters is very obviously a meteor strike. First of all, it's the only thing that could do that besides unexplained earthquake magic. Now, let me change the slide. Hammer of the Waters. So this little Child of the Forest is by Sammy Torres. I superimposed him on the maps. I also added the hammers. We did do the nose and the hat and the hammers. But yes, the Hammer of the Waters. It's said that the children of the forest gathered on the Isle of Faces and sacrificed captive humans or their own young, and all of Westeros shook and trembled, and some of the land fell into the sea, and the waves crashed in, and the force of the waters shattered the land, and that's that. And it collapsed. So the reason why we know the Child of the Forest did not do this, the Maesters tell us, they're like, well, it doesn't really make sense for the children to break the arm of Dorne because they're losing a war with the First Men in Westeros. The First Men had already crossed the arm of Dorne for centuries. They already far outnumbered the children. This is closing the barn door after the horses have gotten out. Doesn't do any good. Horses have already escaped. First Men have already crossed. So the idea that they would sacrifice their own young is crazy. The children of the forest are small in number, and they're being genocided by the First Men. Sacrificing even 10 of their young would be an unfathomable loss. So no, they would not sacrifice their own young to try to win a war so they don't get genocided. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for elves to break the earth. They're f***ing elves. They're a little bloodthirsty, they're ruthless and stuff, but they are at one with the earth. Their spirit goes back into the rocks and trees. And by the time Bran meets them, they are ready to go quietly into the night. So, 3 reasons it doesn't make sense. They had already crossed. They're elves. Okay? And also, like I said, by the time Bran meets them, they are accepting of their fate. They're like, men would fight and struggle, but we have had our day and we are fading from the world, and that's just how it is. We're okay with that. But we're supposed to believe they destroyed the earth in order to protect themselves a mere 8,000 years ago. Yeah, I don't think so. They've been around for 1,000,000 years, they say. 1,000 years. They're a 1,000,000-year-old race. So if they're ready to, it doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. We also have never seen weirwood magic that is capable of causing earthquakes. I mean, maybe it can. Maybe the trees can shake the earth. It's not unfathomable, but we've never seen that. All the skin changer magic is based on astral projection. You're lost. I'm explaining why the children didn't break the Hammer of the Waters. Don't worry. I'm basically explaining why the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor strike. So it starts with realizing the children didn't do it. It doesn't, no part of that story makes sense. So there was an event. There was a breaking of the arm, but it wasn't caused by the children. That is an erroneous association. Now, what caused the moon meteors? Like we said, the comet flew into the moon. Were there magicians that did that? Maybe. We'll get to that. But the idea of the children calling down the hammer doesn't fit. Now, the only thing that could collapse an area of land that big is basically a meteor strike. An earthquake, this is like several small states falling into the ocean. It's hard to appreciate how big this is. Let me call up the big map. The Arm of Dorne, it connected to the Stepstones, or to Cape Wrath here. The Sea of Dorne was an inland sea, and so it's not only where the Stepstones are, but it connects over to where this Rainwood is. So it's a big chunk of land. It's kind of like if Panama and Guatemala and several other countries all fell into the sea to break the land bridge between the Americas. By the way, right next to the Isthmus of Panama is, of course, the dinosaur killer meteor that landed in the Yucatan. So I definitely think George is like sort of looking at that meteor impact and that land bridge and going, a meteor strike that breaks a land bridge. Okay. Oh, Cleo, no. So it's Bloodstone Island time. Let me zoom in. Here we are on the Stepstones. There's 2 named islands. The biggest one is called Bloodstone. As we've already established, the Bloodstone Emperor caused the Long Night or took power during the Long Night. He's associated with the Long Night. He's named after a meteor that he worshipped, and he's called Bloodstone. So here, in the Arm of Dorne, yes, and there would be, yes, you could draw parallels to Balerion and Numenor's destruction as well. I'll have to think about that a little more, but yes. This is coinciding with the time that the Danes fled. So it's all part of the same idea. So Bloodstone Island, it's basically like the meteor did it sign. It's like what broke the Arm of Dorne? A bleeding star. The Bloodstone Emperor, or not maybe the same one, but one that fell at the same time. Because of course, if a large comet or meteor enters the atmosphere, they usually break up into multiple pieces. And so you have multiple large impacts. That's what I'm suggesting. Asshai, the Arm of Dorne, potentially the Iron Islands as well. So Bloodstone Island, a big clue. And then if you remember House of the Dragon, Daemon Targaryen, when he declares himself King of the Narrow Sea, he takes his seat on Bloodstone Island. Now, Daemon Targaryen, as a usurping dragon lord, has certain Azor Ahai Bloodstone Emperor parallels. So him setting up shop on Bloodstone Island as an Azor Ahai parallel with the Red Dragon, it's another clue that that's not just a name. We're supposed to think about Azor Ahai and the Bloodstone Emperor when we look at Bloodstone Island. That's who broke this thing. Then there is, let me put this back down. Way back in the day, I think it was the third or fourth podcast ever. It's also the fourth video on my channel if you go all the way back. The Mountain and the Viper, the Mountain versus the Viper, and the Hammer of the Waters. Kind of a clunky title, but it's what we're talking about. So the entire fight between Oberyn, the Viper, and Gregor Clegane, the trial by combat for Tyrion's life, is giving us Hammer of the Water clues. Okay. And I will just give you the briefest taste of them here. There's like 3 hours of them, but I will give you a small taste. So Oberyn has a spear. Oberyn is covered in solar imagery because Dorne's, the Martell sigil is the sun, speared through, okay? So Oberyn is a sun character with a spear. We might call that a sun spear. And they live in a castle, sun spear, right next to the broken arm of Dorne. So Oberyn, with his sun spear, what does he do right before the fight? Tyrion sees, the steel of the spear has been poisoned, and the poison is black oil. So the tip of the sun spear is oily black steel that's poison. Remember, the meteors are always poisonous, just like in Lovecraft. So poisonous black oil at the tip of the sun spear. Then what does he go and do? The first hit he scores on Gregor is in the arm, just like the Bloodstone meteor hitting the arm of Dorne. We got the oily black stone sun spear stabbing Gregor's arm. And Gregor represents the earth and the moon in the fight. Later, he falls to the ground. Okay? So he's laying on the ground like the earth. He punches back up and breaks Oberyn's face. Oberyn's the sun. And his fist is smoking when it punches up. So you've got the smoking fist, punches the sun's face and smashes it. That is the mushroom cloud of smoke and debris rising from the meteor impact that blots out the face of the sun. We've seen the pattern many times. Fist of the First Men, Storm's End, all this stuff. It's a mushroom cloud. So we see it right there. First, Oberyn stabs him in the arm. So you get the arm of Dorne stabbing. And then once he's on the ground like the earth, he punches back up with a smoking fist and breaks the sun's face. And that's when everyone screams. That's the Long Night. So it's a tremendous fight scene. And it spells out the Long Night, the meteors, Lightbringer. There's the eclipse. It's all there. And the oily stone sun spear is right in the middle. It's the best. It's just like chef's kiss. So if the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor, now we're going to talk about the Pact. If the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor, that means the timeline is wrong. Because the timeline says the Hammer of the Waters was called down near the end of the war between the children and the First Men. And shortly after that, the leaders of both sides gathered on the Isle of Faces, and they made the Pact. And they all sang Kumbaya. And it doesn't really make sense, because it says the children were losing the battle against the First Men. But then the First Men gave up and they made a pact. And the First Men switched religions. This is the best. They gave up their religion and just started worshiping trees. Whereas before they were cutting down the trees. It's quite the change. An entire culture changes their view and changes their religion. What could cause that? We're not told. There's no answer given. However, if the Hammer of the Waters was a moon meteor that caused a long night, then the Pact comes right after that, during the long night. Now this all makes sense. Why did the First Men give up their religion? Well, we know the Children of the Forest saved the First Men's ass during the long night. They helped the last hero. They helped the men of the Night's Watch organized to fight the others and end the long night. The children helped us do that. And that's why the first Night's Watchmen, before the Andals came, all would have sworn their oaths to the Weirwood, just like Jon does. So when the Night's Watch says, I will defend, I will father no sons, I will serve, I'm the light in the darkness, they're swearing that to the Green Seers in the Weirwoods. And they're doing that because the Children of the Forest organized the Night's Watch. They gave them dragon glass. Some of the original Night's Watch were probably skin changers and Green Seers, just like Bloodraven and Jon are. And we'll get to that too. But we know the children helped the first men survive the long night and beat the others. So why did the first men switch religions? Well, 2 reasons. We were grateful to the Children of the Forest, but we also just had our entire culture erased because during the long night, it's a cultural bottleneck. All the established sort of systems of power are going to collapse in chaos as everybody starves. You don't pay taxes when you're starving. There's no police anymore. There's no soldiers anymore. It's just chaos. So again, if you've got an aunt in somewhere else, you go visit her. So all the old systems and orders are collapsed. Mankind is on the verge of extinction, years of famine and drought. Then the children help us. So the pact becomes the thing that created the Night's Watch. We're told the pact on the Isle of Faces, well, they formed the Sacred Order of Green Men, it says, during the pact. Well, so they're to keep watch over the Weirwoods. So right now, the legend of the pact says they formed an order of green men to watch over Weirwoods. Isn't that kind of similar to, after the pact, they formed an order of the Night's Watch, who swear their oaths to Weirwoods and defend Westeros? The oldest castle of the Night's Watch is the Night Fort, where they've got the Black Gate, a giant, strange Weirwood organism that grows hundreds of feet under the ground. So the pact now makes a lot more sense. It's the forming of the Night's Watch. It's the moment when the humans, adopted the worship of the old gods, because some of them became Green Seers and Skin Changers. And they were the ones probably fighting this war. Okay, now, so Dragonsteel. This is how all this crap that I've said so far now, it's going to be just bolted down to Westeros. So here's your new Last Hero artwork by Justin Sweet. This is him battling ice spiders. Obviously, this artwork did not exist when I made my ice spiders video, or else I would have used it. So the Last Hero's Sword of Dragonsteel has always been a big question mark. Because in the Westerosi story of the Last Hero, there's no dragons, there's no Azor Ahai, there's no Lightbringer, there's none of that stuff. But there is this Sword of Dragonsteel. So the Last Hero's Sword of Dragonsteel is really the only clue that this connects to Azor Ahai stuff. Besides the fact that Melisandre thinks Azor Ahai is going to appear at the wall to fight the others, which is what the Last Hero did. But this Dragonsteel, well, some smart people a long time ago figured out that Dawn could be Dragonsteel because meteors can be dragons. So meteor steel can be Dragonsteel. So if the Last Hero had Dawn, which yes, probably did, the Black Sword's the evil one, I think. Maybe not, I don't know. But it seems like Last Hero probably had Dawn. And so that could be Dragonsteel by virtue of it being a meteor sword. So our hero is associated with comets and dragons, essentially, potentially by the name Dragonsteel. But then when we dive into the Last Hero stuff, the House Dayne, remember, we said, oh, okay, well, Son of the Morning is like Sword of the Morning. And Dawn, all this alludes to Venus, and Venus can also be translated as Lightbringer. So when we look at the O's of the Night's Watch, they're also cobbled together from that Venus language. I am the sword in the darkness, the light that brings the dawn. So the light that brings the dawn, Lightbringer, right there, that's Venus. It rises before the sun. It's known as the usher of the sun, or the herald of the sun. That's why it's called Lightbringer. It comes before the sun. So here comes the sun, everyone. Like the Beatles singing, Here Comes the Sun. That's Venus. So the Night's Watch, they are swords in the darkness that bring the dawn. You know what I mean? It's the same language as dawn itself. So basically Dawn, Lightbringer, and Dragonsteel, we can tie them all together because the Night's Watch oaths are made from Venus mythology. And obviously the Last Hero with Dragonsteel is on the Night's Watch. He's leading the Night's Watch. Now that we know that the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros, we have a physical plausible way for all of this stuff from the east, magic swords, Azor Ahai. Well, yeah, it did come to Westeros in ancient day. The Danes prove it. The Fewstone Fortress proves it. So now we can say, yeah, this Dragonsteel sword, this really was some sort of prototype Valyrian steel sword. And that's why Dawn seems like Valyrian steel. They're related. So this is kind of the whole point. See this last bullet point. Dragonsteel and the Last Hero, this is where it matters. This is why all the Eastern world building that we've done so far in the last 2 hours is relevant to the story, because this is what Jon and Daenerys are coming back around to finish. The idea of dragon lords at the wall, we've got a bunch of them. We've got Jon and Daenerys, we got Bloodraven. Melisandre might be Bloodraven's child. You know what I mean? I mean, Dany's not there yet, but she's going to be. So it's like, yeah, were there dragon lords defending the wall the first time around? Yes. Yes, there were dragons in Westeros. They were on Battle Isle, and they probably were at the wall. So the Last Hero, was he riding a dragon? Was Night King riding a dragon? Like, it's kind of one of the big secrets about this Long Night Struggle. You see why George didn't put the dragons in the Westeros Long Night story, because it would be too much of a reveal. It would give away what Jon and Dany are supposed to do. George is leading the reader towards concluding that these Targaryens and the dragon people from the east, they've got some destiny confronting the ice demons of the north from Westeros. We can feel that in our bones, but all this world building is showing you why it's true. That's probably the easy way to say it. So this is The Night's Watch versus the Others by Zippo514. I photoshopped it to make it look like Dawn. Eldrick Shadow Chaser. The other names for Azor Ahai all match to places in the east. Hyrkoon the hero is from the kingdom of Hyrkoon. Nefarion, there's a city called Nefer inside the borders of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So that's where he comes from. Yin-Tar, obviously from Yi-Ti, which is part of the Great Empire. But Eldrick Shadow Chaser, who's that? Well, Eldrick Shadow Chaser seems to be the name associated with Westeros for Azor Ahai. Either Azor Ahai or the Last Hero. Because the houses of Stark and Dayne have kept this name alive for whatever reason. There's echoes of the name in both their houses. So there's Ulrich Dayne, who's a Sword of the Morning, Ulrich versus Elric. And then there's Edric Dayne, who is the young Dayne that Arya meets. Now, over in House Stark, there's Edric Snowbeard, and there's two Elric Starks. So Elric and Edric versus Eldrick. Also, Edric Dayne is considered to be named after Eddard Stark. So even Eddard can be seen as a variant of Eldrick. Yeah, that's right. So basically, why are houses Stark and Dayne naming people Elric and Edric and Ulrich? Well, it could be because the original name for Azor Ahai, or Last Hero, was in fact Eldrick Shadow Chaser. And of course, chasing the shadows, the others are called White Shadows, kind of makes sense. So this has got to be the Westerosi name for either Azor Ahai or the Last Hero. And yeah, there's more. Eric and Arik. There's other name variants to be found, but it's in Stark and Dayne that we see these old names. And Stark and Dayne are the two houses we associate with the Last Hero. The Daynes because of Dawn and Lightbringer stuff, and the Starks because the Last Hero story seems to be a Stark story. It's told to Bran. Bran and Jon are both echoes of the Last Hero and Arya. The Last Hero also, he has a dog, probably a wolf, right? So Last Hero associated with Stark and Dayne naming people Elric and Ulrich and Edric. So that all fits together pretty well. So Eldrick Shadow Chaser, yet another thing that ties the Azor Ahai stuff from the east to Westeros, Stark, Dayne, and the Last Hero. That's all. These pieces are both by Urtach Altanas. Firewhite's Watch. I made a series, Melisandre Secrets. One of them is called Firewhite's Watch, so I recommend that. But point is, we all see this coming. Jon's going to be resurrected. He might be a very complex ice and fire zombie, but Mel's going to have something to do with it. And Jon dreams of having the burning sword. George has talked about Beric specifically as being a foreshadowing for Jon. We know that Red Priests can reanimate the dead. Thoros reanimated Beric. There's a Red Priestess hovering over Jon, right? So Jon's obviously at some point gonna have some lore magic reanimating him. And this makes sense because we have seen that Beric can light his own sword on fire with his own blood. Okay? This is the thing about the Azor Ahai legend. It's like, ooh, to make the hero's sword, he had to sacrifice his wife. That's tough, but he just had to do it. But then we've seen if your heart is bathed in Melora's fire, you can make your own flaming sword. And Jon, who is an Azor Ahai figure and dreams of wielding a burning sword, is probably going to become a fire wight. So the problem with Beric is that when his swords are lit on fire, they break because they're not Valyrian steel. They're not unbreakable. So if Jon lights a Valyrian steel sword on fire, like Oathkeeper or Longclaw, obviously, or even Dawn, they will not break. They will remain lit with magic R'hllor fire. And then you have a Lightbringer. So I do think we're going to be having multiple flaming swords and flaming Valyrian steel weapons. Check out my War for the Dawn stream, where I talked about that. And I think that fire wights can obviously make flaming swords. We probably will have more than just Jon. Melisandre is very powerful. I suspect that she will make multiple fire wights from different members of the Watch and other people who are at the wall fighting, like Brienne or Jaime or whoever else. And here's the thing. Fire whiting is shadow binding. These people are not resurrected. The corpses are reanimated with magic, and the ghost is bound to the body. And I do believe it is shadow binding. It just fits the description too well. We are literally binding the shadows. And I think that that shadow binding and R'hlorism is really just all tied together. They're doing the same kind of stuff. And Melisandre is both a shadow binder and a R'hllorist. They have a Red Temple in Asshai. So the Red Temple sends some of their acolytes to Asshai to study. Mel going to Asshai to study is not random. The Red Temple sent her there. She's a slave. So it means that the Red Temple, they send some of their priests to become shadow binders. And I think that Thoros basically did a shadow binding without realizing it when he resurrected Beric. And there's all this talk about Mel making a shadow baby with Jon, but he's going to need to be shadow bound. He's going to be dead. So really we're talking about Mel. Jon's going to be the shadow. So if you think back to the original Night's Watch, that's the point. The original Night's Watch, if we had, Great Empire of the Dawn people and flaming swords and dragons and maybe Dawn, then we probably had fire wights. We probably had fire magic and shadow binding and shit. We have it at the wall now, and I think everything now is essentially echoing the past. So I do think we should think about ancient shadow binders and fire whiting happening at the wall. Additionally, there's in the Azor Ahai prophecy, it says all those who die fighting in his cause will be reborn. And I think that could be literal, meaning like Azor Ahai's army is fire wights. That's who his army are. They're reborn people. So yeah, do it yourself, Lightbringer, shadow binding, all those who die fighting. So Azor Ahai sounds like he's leading an army of zombies. And we've seen that fire zombies are just the people to fight the others. Any kind of zombie is really, because zombies don't need to eat food. There's not much food north of the wall. Zombies don't need to sleep. They don't need to stay warm, whether they're ice or fire. So a fire wight who can light his sword on fire, it doesn't need to sleep or eat. This is the ideal soldier to fight the others. So you got that. Fire White Watch. It's coming, and it may have happened the first time around. Now, a little bit of a pivot here. We're going to talk Nissa and the Children of the Forest. This is the other part of the Great Empire of the Dawn coming to Westeros. Part of it has to do with fighting the others and Lightbringer and all that shit. We know that. We feel it in our bones. However, Nissa is a child of the forest, is a giant piece of the puzzle. And it's a little bit cryptic to figure it out, but I caught on to it very early. And one of the reasons why is because in Scandinavia, there is a tradition, a folklore tradition of what's called the Nis, sometimes the Nissa man. But it's a little elf that it's standard fairy folklore shit. Like you leave little food offerings or little flower offerings outside your porch, and then the Nis will bless your home. They're often associated with farmsteads. But if you anger them, they will fuck with you. They will kill your crops and your animals and stuff like that. So it's very important to placate them. They are little elf people. The Nis. So Nissa. Is she an elf person? The answer is yes. Another way that we know this is the Melii. Okay. So the Melii are from Greek mythology. They are dryads. They are elves, forest ladies, whatever you want to say. They are tied to trees. That's the best way I would describe it. It's basically elves who are specifically tied to trees. They are avatars of trees. The Melii are avatars of ash trees. Okay, now the ash trees are are a sacred tree in many mythologies. But in Greek myth, this has to do with Ournnos and his balls. So Ournnos' balls are chopped off. They fall to the earth. And the sperm from his balls is what becomes Venus. She's born from the sea foam. She rises from the foam. That's because Venus, the star, rises from the ocean. When you look at the ocean, it rises from the horizon. But for the blood from Ournnos' balls became the Melii. So they're tied to the same Venus mythology. And the Melii grow up. They are the dryads of the ash trees. They arm one of the first races of men with spears from their ash trees. And they also feed the god Zeus with the sap from the ash tree, the honey sap. So these ash trees are these sacred trees. They give the food of the gods to Zeus, and they armed the first race of man. Okay. Now the thing about the ash tree is that in Norse myth, the ash tree is Yggdrasil, and the weirwoods are Yggdrasil. And George loves to compare the weirwoods to ash trees because they're like burning trees, and so they're covered in ash. So all this stuff about in a grove of ash. Beric is resurrected in a grove of ash trees because Odin is resurrected on an ash tree. All right. So he's sort of doing a mythology crossover where he's imagining the children of the forest as the Melii, the dryads of the weirwood. That's the point. And so you get all these Nissa characters that have ties to the children of the forest. So Melisandre of Asshai, whose name sounds like Melii, she looks like a weirwood tree, and she plays the role of Nissa. I'm going to have to get another Red Bull. I need to feed my brain caffeine. I've got so much to explain still. This is only like most of my theories. I probably will just have to say, watch the Venus of the Woods series or the Weirwood Goddesses series. There's so much behind this idea. The Melii thing is really cool, but it's a little cryptic to connect it all. Probably the more straightforward thing is the Catwoman idea. The children of the forest have cat eyes, and so many of the Nissa characters have cat symbolism. Cat, as in Catelyn. There is Cersei, who's a lioness. A couple of the Nissa characters are Asha Greyjoy, Osha the Wildling. One of the children of the forest is named Ashes. So there's a lot of Ash names. Azor Dayne. All these Ash name variants are references to weirwoods, which are an ash tree. So Nissa is basically a weirwood dryad. She is a Catwoman. She is like a Melii, and she's like the Nis. And the best evidence for this really is you have to look at the parallel characters. Like all the figures that play Nissa roles are weirwood women or ash tree women or cat women. And all those things are pointing back at Child of the Forest. So the point of Nissa being a Child of the Forest, it makes a sense out of a lot of stuff. Why did the Great Empire of the Dawn come to Westeros? Well, what's unique about Westeros? Children of the Forest, weirwood magic. It's powerful stuff, seems to be unique. We talked about the Pact, okay, and the Hammer of the Waters. So the Hammer of the Waters legend says that on the Isle of Faces, children of the forest were massacred, sacrificed, and this called down the Hammer of the Waters. Well, the thing is, if Nissa was a child of the forest, then Azor Ahai killing Nissa to call down the moon meteors starts to sound a lot like the Hammer of the Waters legend. Green Seers kill children of the forest, call down the hammer. Azor Ahai kills a child of the forest, a significant one, and calls down the meteors. But the Hammer of the Waters was a meteor. Once we realized Nissa was probably a child of the forest, like I said, it unites the legends of the hammer and the Azor Ahai myth. So where did Azor Ahai kill Nissa Nissa? Maybe on the Isle of Faces. We think about that as happening in the east, but maybe it didn't. Maybe it happened in Westeros, because again, it seems like the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros. And if Nissa Nissa is a child of the forest, then the picture that you're starting to think about is this guy from the east coming to Westeros and marrying / murdering a child of the forest. And I think that's pretty much what we're talking about here. Where it says God's Eye above there, forget that. It should say the Green Sea. And this is the other way that we know Nissa Nissa is a child of the forest. And I have to give shout out to Ravenous Reader. This is a little mini theory of its own. But basically, it's ultra pun. The Green Seers swim in a green sea. Green Seers. Okay. The real truth here is that a weirwood, the name weirwood is important. So on the bottom, you see what's called a fishing weir. And it's almost like a dam, but it looks like a crappy dam. It's like, it's not really stopping the water very much. It's designed to strain larger fish out of the river and ensnare them. There are finer branches in between the big ones. So it's like a wooden meshwork. It catches the fish. And then the people on top that you see, they're using poles and nets to sort of like scoop out the trapped fish. So you're trapping the fish and then just scooping them right out. It's an easy way to fish. It's called a fishing weir. Now, Bloodraven, talking about the weirwoods, he says, time is like a river, and men are trapped in its flow, always moving from past to future. But the weirwoods are eternal, and they are not moved by that river. And through these gates, we, can see all of the river of time at once. So he's literally describing the way a weir is not moved by a river. So imagine this river here. That's the river of time. The weirwoods stride the river of time, but they are not moved by it. They are eternal. They can see the whole river. They can remember everything that's passed through them. Okay? So George is adapting the physical function of a weir to this river of time metaphor. That's the weirwood. They stride the river of time like a weir. The green seers are the fish. Just as the fish are caught in the wooden meshwork of the weir, the green seers are caught in the roots of the trees. Just like a fish. And Bran even observes the older green seers of the children. They're making O shapes with their mouths when he walks by. They're going like that, like fish. It's a joke. And so there's this entire metaphor that the green seers swim in a green sea, and that the weirwoods are the ones moderating that green sea. And so we get all this stuff about people going into green water. It's going into the weirwood net. And mermaids is where this is all about. So Nissa Nissa, often the Nissa Nissa characters are mermaids. But like the Grey King married a mermaid, Durin married a mermaid. There's mermaid symbolism. Cat has mermaid symbolism. And what this tells you, when the Nissa Nissa figures are mermaids, it's like, Nissa Nissa is someone that lives in the Green Sea. Dany is the most important Nissa Nissa character. What does she do after she marries Drogo? They go into the great green Dothraki Sea. She wanders around a green sea. Nissa Nissa is at home in the Green Sea, just as Dany is. She rides a horse the color of a silver sea, of a winter sea. It's a silver horse the color of a winter sea. So she's riding a seahorse around the Green Sea. And that's because Nissa Nissa is a weirwood net creature that lives in the weirwood net. That's about as much as I'm going to say about that. But it's fun. Check out the Secret Origins of the Green Men, Garth the Green Man, where I give the longer explanation. And that's the thing, is that a fishing weir is also called a fish garth. So Garth the Green, who's a green man that plants weirwoods, he's also named after a weirwood. The name Garth, interchangeable with weir. So he is Weir the Green Weir. That's Garth. Bubba, wait, it gets worse, in the words of Ownix. It gets worse. Because a garth is also a word used to describe a garden in the middle of a castle or monastery. The garth, the sacred garth. Monasteries have garths. It's a little garden in the middle. They usually have a tree in the middle, which in a Christian monastery represents the Garden of Eden, tree of knowledge. So a garth is a garden enclosed in a castle with a tree in the middle. What is a godswood? A garden enclosed in a castle with a tree in the middle. So the godswood is a garth garden. The weirwood is a garth tree. And Garth the Green planted weirwoods. So you can see how all this is tied together. The fish weir and fish garth layer of the weirwoods is important. It ties to all this green sea stuff. And yes, Carl Karsnark, the word mare means sea, and the great Dothraki Sea used to be the Silver Sea, part of it anyway. So she is riding a silver mare around a silver mare, or a pale mare around a pale mare, if you want to say. George loves wordplay, is the moral of the story. And Nissa was a mermaid who went into the Green Sea. Moving right along. So a question I get a lot. LML, you said Nissa was an elf, but she's also supposed to be a Valyrian if she's the Amethyst Empress. So how can she be both? Thank you, Rodora Jacob, for drawing it for me. So guys, fantasy elves often do have silver hair. So the idea of a silver-haired child of the forest, that's fine. One of the child of the forest is named Snowy Locks. Maybe that's just an old one with white hair. Maybe. But the children of the forest, like I said in a recent video called the Children of the Lizard People, those eyes, the slitted eyes that are described as cat-like eyes, are also snake eyes. Snakes have slitted eyes too, and a lot of other reptiles do as well. So even though they're like, oh, they have cat's eyes, well, they could have just said, well, they have snake's eyes. One of them is called Scales, and Bran names them based on their physical description. Snowy Locks, Coals because of the hot colored eyes. One's called Scales. That means that some of their skin must be scaly. So they got snake eyes, scaly skin. They got four-fingered black-clawed hands, kind of like a bird or like a dinosaur. So the children of the forest, they're therianthropes. That just means human-animal hybrid, essentially. They have bits of all kinds of animals. The skin is like a doe, and they have cat eyes. Wouldn't be surprised if they got a tail tucked away somewhere we hadn't seen. So, yeah, Nissa can very well be both child of the forest and some sort of Valyrian. She might not be a regular child of the forest. She's more likely to be a hybrid anyway, a human child of the forest hybrid. And the human side could be Great Empire of the Dawn Dragon Lord, because that's kind of where all this is going. The Great Empire of the Dawn, they were coming to Westeros for this weirwood magic, and human-animal hybrids are a big part of this. So there is definitely a way that Nissa can be part child of the forest, and yet somebody that we would think about as part Valyrian or dragony, Dragon Lord, reptilian DNA. Those two things can go together. And I do think, and I got into this in the video, that yes, there's a strong possibility that skin changing or green seeing magic was used to create the dragon bond by the Great Empire of the Dawn. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about lemur theory. The way that skin changing would be used to create the dragon bond. There's two halves of the dragon bond, I believe. On one hand, we know the Targs have reptilian DNA, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we need to put lizard DNA inside of people. But I think there's also people spirits inside of lizards. I think there are Valyrian ancestors or proto-Valyrian ancestors inside the dragons, and that is part of what facilitates the bond. And it's lemur theory that spells this out. Shout out to John Stargarian from the Westeros.org forums. Lemur theory goes like this. In the forests of Qohor, there are lemurs with silver fur and purple eyes that people call little Valyrians. It's very weird. That's all we're told. Little lemurs in Qohor that are called little Valyrians. So did the Valyrians evolve from lemurs? Probably not. That's not it. That would be too dumb. Here's the thing. Did a little research on lemurs. Lemurs are from Madagascar and also Australia. There's a whole thing behind that. But in Madagascar, the lemurs are thought to contain the ghosts of the ancestors of the native people there. Lemur is a Latin word. It means ghost. So the Romans named these animals because I'm going to say the Romans. I don't know who fucking named him, but whoever named, that was dumb. Wouldn't have been the Romans. It would have been English biologists in the 18th century or something like that. Sorry. They used a Latin word, lemur. Lemures. It's the same word in Lemuria. And it means ghost. And the people in Madagascar believe that the lemurs hold the ghosts of their ancestors. So, why would George name lemurs Valerians? It's because the Valerian ghosts, the ghosts of the Valerians' ancestors, are inside of animals now. Not lemurs, dragons, where we'd expect them to be. But the lemurs are a proxy to spell out the idea of Valerian ancestor ghosts trapped inside of animals. That's what's going on with the dragon bond. So, Three Heads has the dragon. The original meaning is about the dragon bond. It's the head of the dragon, the head of the rider, and the head of the dead dragon lord spirit inside the dragon. That's also why the Valerian sphinxes are dragon bodies with human heads, because there's a human head in control of the dragon. And it's not the dragon rider, it's the spirit in the dragon. And that's why also the dragons of Valeria are named after their gods. They're the holiest things that they have. They are just like the old gods of the forest, the weirwoods. The gods of the Valerians are their dragons. They are the receptacles for their ancestors. Okay, you with me? There are some lemurs in Australia, but there are weird connections between Madagascar and Australia that suggest some very ancient migration patterns. It's a very interesting rabbit hole you can dive into. So that's the point of the lemurs. And check out a video I made called Daemon's Song after we saw Daemon singing to Vermithor on House of the Dragon. Because the translated lyrics of the song, Daemon is singing. He's like, 2 heads to a third sing, as him and the dragon are both singing. So it's like, who are Daemon and Vermithor singing to in that room? There's no one else there. It's the ancestor spirit inside of Vermithor. And what is Daemon trying to do? He's preparing Vermithor to bond again with somebody new. That's going to happen in season 2. So he's singing a song. He's getting the dragon to sing, and they're singing to a third head. That third head is the ghost spirit inside of Vermithor, who is a distant ancestor of Daemon. You get it? So check out Daemon's Song for the longer explanation, but I just gave you the summary. So there you go. So what we are exploring right now in this section are the Great Empire of the Dawn's connections to weirwoods and Children of the Forest. There are many. It's not just Nissa Nissa being a Children of the Forest. It's that the Children of the Forest look like lizard people. It's that, to finish up with the ghost idea, like, how do you stuff a dragon spirit? How do you stuff a spirit of a Valerian or a proto-Valerian from the Great Empire of the Dawn inside of a dragon? Green seer magic would get it done. Skin changer magic. Easy. We know that's what happens with skin changers. They live their second life inside of their animal. So if the dragon bond is a mutated form of skin changer magic, all you need to do is blood sacrifice the Valerian, and their spirit goes inside the dragon, and then they're in there. Something like that. So another connection between Green Seer magic and the Great Empire of the Dawn is Tiger Woman and the Isle of Lang. So the Isle of Lang has some very tall people on it, the Langi. And the Isle of Lang is called the Land of 10,000 Tigers. Isle of Lang is ruled by empresses who call themselves the God Empress, as long as anyone can remember. And the emperors of the Great Empire of the Dawn are called God Emperors. So, Lang, as you can see on the map, is right next to Yi Ti, and it says specifically the Great Empire of the Dawn included the Isle of Lang. So, did the God Emperors of the Great Empire of the Dawn sometimes marry women from Lang? The God Empresses, maybe. And it said the Bloodstone Emperor, after he murdered Amethyst Empress, took a tiger woman for his bride. What's a tiger woman? I don't know. There's 2 answers, though. One is a woman from Lang, a God Empress of the Land of 10,000 Tigers. You could imagine they wear tiger skins, tiger headdresses. That's tiger woman. And they're much feared because they're very tall. A tall woman, as we all know, are very intimidating. So you got this tall, intimidating woman looking down at you with a tiger headdress. Oh my God, he married a tiger woman. But that could be part of it, certainly. But of course, tigers are cats. And the children of the forest have those cat eyes. And we've seen that George is using cat symbolism for Nissa Nissa characters. At least if you've watched my older videos, you've seen that. So Tiger Woman could simply be a child of the forest woman or a green woman, which we're about to talk about. But some sort of cat-eyed woman could also be Tiger Woman. And on Lang, we have that's right. The entire Old Ones theory is just a bullet point on this iceberg. On Lang, there are subterranean cities where the Old Ones live, quote unquote. And we're going to talk about this later. But I think the Old Ones are green men. And I will tell you why. But the very tall, the 8-foot tall people of Lang, they have golden brown skin and they have eyes that are larger, amber-hued eyes that are larger than that of most people. And they see better in the dark. So they have these kind of large golden eyes, amber eyes, and they're hugely tall and associated with tigers. So it starts to sound like these are weird magical people. Because remember, it's not just the child of the forest. The Nathi are sort of elf-like and strange. Seems like the Langi are too. Okay, so this whole thing about Tiger Woman being a child of the forest or being a god empress of Lang, what I'm saying right now is that it could be the same thing. God empresses of Lang in ancient day could have looked more animal-like than they do now. They still look a little animal-like with those eyes, but it could have been more like that in the past. So Tiger Woman, she could be, like I said, some sort of alt-humanoid. Let's just say that for now. Okay, so next up is Yin-Tar, and shout out to Greywaist Tim. So one of the 5 names for Azor Ahai, this flaming sword hero, is given as Yin-Tar. Now, Yin-Tar kind of makes sense as a name for Azor Ahai. Yin is the black side of yin-yang. And we know all this stuff is associated with darkness. Black meteor, long night. So yin means black. Tar, just think of tar as in like black tar rum, which is what the Summer Islanders serve up. So yin tar could just mean like black tar or like dark energy tar or yin energy blackness or just black. There's a bunch of ways you could translate it, but it's definitely a long night kind of name. Here's the thing. Tar is also a prefix used, or a title, I should say, used by the rulers of Numenor, at least the faithful ones. There's Tar Palantir, Tar Miriel on the show. The new show's Tar Miriel. By the way, Tar Miriel is a direct Amethyst Empress parallel. The Amethyst Empress, Bloodstone Emperor stuff is very tightly parallel to Numenor, the downfall of Numenor, and Ar-Pharazôn, if you know that story, which is one of the clues that Amethyst Empress is Nissa Nissa and Azor Ahai is Bloodstone Emperor, is the parallel to Numenor. And I explored that in Great Empire of the Dawn, Westeros a bit. So Yin Tar, the name Tar, could be another Georgian shout out to the Numenorians. So it's a pretty cool Azor Ahai name. However, in Yi Ti, their long night story is that a woman with a monkey's tail is the one who ended. So Tar means king in Elvish. In what's it called? Sindarin? Yeah, okay, so it means king. So Tar Palantir, Tar Miriel means king, queen, emperor, lord, something like that. Woman with a monkey's tail is supposedly the hero who ended the long night in Yi Ti. And to this day, they wear monkey tail hats. I imagine them as like the Davy Crockett raccoon tail hats, but it's a monkey tail hat. And we see them when Dany's in the bazaar at Vaes Dothrak or Karth, one or the other. She sees some people with monkey tail hats from Yi Ti. So they remember it. It is that old, whatever this legend is. But it's hard to say. The Children of the Forest, like I said, wouldn't be surprised if a tail popped out, but we've never seen that they have tails. So you could, woman with a monkey's tail, like, well, maybe that's saying, oh, Nissa Nissa was the hero somehow, or maybe Nissa Nissa's daughter or something like that. But it could be that, and this is Greywaist Tim's idea, that the woman with the monkey's tail is Yin Tar, and that she was a flaming sword hero. And I don't know what the monkey tail part is, but the idea of one of these, well, first of all, the idea is that there wasn't just one Azor Ahai, but there was a crew or a cabal or a cult or a family, a bunch of people with flaming sword magic, the Azor Ahai people. That seems likely because, again, we're headed towards that. So maybe these 5 different names, maybe they do represent different people. Remember, Elric and Harkoon are different people. So maybe Yntar isn't Azor Ahai, but an Azor Ahai person. So when we think about the ending of the story that we have coming, we've got 2 women that are going to be part of the fighting the others team. There's Arya and there's Dany. They're both going to be mixing it up, literally confronting the others with weapons and animals close up. So the idea that there was an original member of the Azor Ahai team who was a woman makes plenty of sense. In fact, it would be weird if it wasn't that way, since we're seeing that repeated in the future. So Yntar could be Monkey Tail Woman. And the last thing I'll say about it is that some people have noticed that Tyrion, of course, has lots of monkey symbolism. And that's taken from Sun Wukong. Check out Tyrion Targaryen for that whole story. Tyrion is often described as a monkey man. So he's going to be Dany's hand or advisor. But if you think, he's also going to be her tail, in that, like, the king, their procession is called their tail or their train. So a woman with a monkey's tail is actually going to be Dany, with Tyrion helping and advising her. So that's another echo of Yntar, or like a foreshadowing. So I like Tim's idea, to be honest, that Yntar is Monkey Tail Woman, and that this is the Yitish hero of this group of heroes. But the idea of a Monkey Tail Woman still makes me think of somebody that's like a human-animal hybrid of some kind. And they may have had to fight the others on both sides, because we're told the demons of the Lion of Night pressed in against, the 5 forts in the borders of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So this could be a related phenomenon. Yeah, was it not a tiger tail? I guess that's probably right. I'm overlooking the obvious. Yeah, cats have tails. Tiger Woman and Monkey Tail Woman could obviously be similar, because, yeah, the tigers have a striped tail. I could see that. And I think those were my original thoughts, is that Monkey Tail Woman must be related to Nissa as a child of the forest, just like Tiger Woman is. But it's hard to say exactly. Okay, so I got ahead of myself. I already explained this a little bit. This slide is explaining that, okay, so now that we know Nissa was a child of the forest, like I said, it unites the Azor Ahai and the Hammer myth. So we have dragon lords coming to Westeros, potentially marrying hybrid women of the children of the forest. We might want to say there's a long-running breeding program, potentially, with green men and children of the forest and the Great Empire of the Dawn. So when Azor Ahai kills Nissa, that's probably the same as the Hammer of the Waters legend. I explained that. So it's the murder hammer. It's called down by the killing of children. There's a really cool bit from Ironborn history. There's a dude named Euron Redhand, and he is a very dastardly Ironborn king. He invites everyone to a king's moot and then kills all the other competitors. He kills 13 other potential kings, lords and kings, and 50 drowned priests. And it says that Naga's ribs, which of course are weirwood, ran red with blood. So he killed them on Old Wick, right at the crown of the hill, inside of Naga's ribs. He killed 13 lords and kings. So this is getting into Green Zombie Last Hero, theory, where Last Hero has 12 companions who died. But then he emerges as the leader of the Night's Watch. My Green Zombie theory is that those are the same people. Just like we said, Fire Whites might have been the original Night's Watch. Last Hero's companions were probably resurrected in front of weirwood trees. And that's what the Night's Watch oath is reenacting, where they kneel as green boys and they rise again as men of the Watch. That's just a resurrection ceremony. And so Euron Redhand, think about what he's reenacting. He's killing 13 people in a kind of weirwood grove. And his name, Red Hand. The weirwood leaves are described as bloody hands always. So it's like Euron Weirwood Leaf Hand killed 13 people and made the weirwood of Naga's ribs run red with blood. So I think this is essentially a reenactment of what happened here. It's likely that Nissa would have been killed along with other children of the forest or green men. That is probably the Last Hero's companions dying. It's probably all the same story. We've seen that pattern over and over and over. We see this ritualistic killing of a dozen or 13, and then we see that some sign of resurrection. And of course, Euron Redhand is thrown down by the descendants of the people whom he killed at that King's Moot. And there's some other connections too. But the artist here, on the lower half, this Weirwood is by Lauren Cannon. And the upper one is by Miranda 8888. The other thing about the idea of blood sacrifice on the Isle of Faces is that we're also told that when they signed the pact, right after the Hammer of the Waters, they gave the Weirwood trees faces on the Isle of Faces. And giving a Weirwood tree a face might involve blood sacrifice. That is definitely a theory. We've seen Bran saw some sort of blood sacrifice to a Weirwood tree. Maybe that's part of the ritual of giving it its face and opening its eyes, potentially. So even the signing of the pact story also potentially puts blood sacrifice of somebody on the Isle of Faces. So I do think that happened. I tend to think that Azor Ahai killed Nissa Nissa on the Isle of Faces. That's probably where it happened. That is my vote. Let me know, chat. Do you think it happened in the East or on the Isle of Faces? Those are basically the two choices. Oh, Weirwood Net invasion. Well, this will be easy. Simple. Hardly an inconvenience. This is by Cheesecloth. This artwork. Cheesecloth is a myth head, a fan of the show. And so here we have the Red Comet. This is actually the Weirwood at White Tree. And you can barely see there's a Night's Watchman holding a skull in his hand. And remember, the White Tree Weirwood is huge like this. It's bigger than this even. It's enormous. So the whole point of Azor Ahai killing Nissa Nissa, the Child of the Forest hybrid, it seems to me, is to invade the Weirwood Net. There is a strong implication that the Weirwood Net is invaded and defiled. I don't even know where to friggin' begin with this. It's such a big theory, and there's so much evidence. A lot of it is a symbolic parallels. I made a video about it just recently that I would recommend. Azor Ahai and the Weirwood Net. But what I will say, first of all, the Weirwoods are suggested as doors many times. The Moon Door, the Black Gate, the door on the House of Black and White. And if you think about the House of Black and White, the inside of it is the Death Realm. It's just like going inside of the Weirwood Net. Everything is dark. It's all about death. There's dead bodies in there. And there's Weirwoods, because the Green Seers are living in the sort of the realm of the dead. Bloodraven's cave full of bones. You know, it's very comparable. So the Weirwood doors, the whole point of the Weirwood door symbolism is that the Weirwood is a door. Bloodraven says it is through these gates that we may gaze. Maybe we can do more than gaze. So Azor Ahai seems to have forced his way into the Weirwood Net. That is the picture I am getting. Nissa Nissa is already tied to the Weirwoods, and somehow in his act of blood magic, he is able to use her sacrifice to force his way in. He is obtaining the fire of the gods. That is the goal. That is the goal of all of these people. The way that I noticed it is with Beric. Okay, so make this really simple. Beric is an obvious Azor Ahai clone because he's powered by R'hllorist fire magic, with the R'hllorist believe in Azor Ahai, and he wields a flaming sword, just like Azor Ahai. He's also the people's champion, like Azor Ahai is supposed to be. However, Beric lives in a damn Weirwood cave, and he resembles Bloodraven. Bloodraven has one red eye, the other one is put out, and he lives in a Weirwood cave. Beric, one eye put out, one red eye, presumably. It's described as a red wound, but we've seen that cats' eyes are red and glowing when they're powered by R'hllor. So Beric, presumably, one red eye, like Bloodraven. Bloodraven is called a scarecrow. Beric is called a scarecrow. There are other parallels, too, that escape me. But they're both, the scarecrow one is a strong one. And then if you look at the scarecrow Night's Watch brothers that the Black Brothers make, the fake ones, they make literal scarecrows to dress them up as Night's Watchmen, stick them on top of the wall to make it look like to the wildlings that there are more of them. And they're on top of Castle Black, too. Well, what happens in Jon's stream, those scarecrow Night's Watch brothers catch on fire, just like Beric is on fire, a scarecrow brother who is on fire. Bloodraven is a scarecrow brother, a dragon who is also a Night's Watchman. So there's this parallel between Bloodraven, Night's Watch Firewhites, and Beric, who is a Firewhite, holding a flaming sword. So it begins to tell you these ideas are related. And just real simply, it's like, well, if Beric's not just in a weirwood cave, he's sitting amongst a tangle of weirwood roots when the scene opens. And then he walks down the steps. So he's in a weirwood throne. I'm not saying that he's a green seer. I'm just saying he is presented like a green seer, sitting in amongst weirwood roots, looking like Bloodraven, but with Azor Ahai's sword. So, was Azor Ahai some sort of resurrected green seer who lived in a weirwood cave? It's like, oh, we should explore this idea. Then you look at the other Azor Ahai figures. It's everywhere. Jon is an Azor Ahai figure. He is a skin changer. And his wolf looks just like a weirwood tree. So even though he's not a green seer whose skin changes a weirwood, he's a skin changer whose skin changes a wolf that looks like a weirwood. Then we have Bloodraven himself, a green seer who is a dragon person. And he has Dark Sister, a black Valyrian steel sword. Stannis poses as Azor Ahai, but he's got the Stagman symbolism of House Baratheon, which is just green man symbolism. The green men are the one who have antlers on their heads. And the green men live on the Isle of Faces and are probably green seers. So Stannis, the Stagman, is also Azor Ahai. That's the same as saying Beric is Azor Ahai in a weirwood cave. It's just telling you Azor Ahai has some crossover with the green men and weirwood magic. So it's invading the weirwood net. That's the thing. And that's why the weirwoods look tortured and screaming. Okay, so that was a section break. We are now shifting focus a little bit. I'll let you see the remaining. So here's what we've got left. I told you it's going to be like a 4-hour stream. So Bran the Apprentice. All right, so let's back up. We've gone kind of deep into the magic. I want to back up and talk world building again a little bit. Who was Bran the Builder? Okay, who was Bran the Builder? We are told that he is associated with the building of several places. Obviously Winterfell. He set the first stones of Winterfell under the watchful eyes of the Heart Tree. We are told that he built the wall. And that's the picture you see here. This is by Chase Stone on top. And that's Storm's End by Ronstas Testeo on the bottom. And I'll tell you what, Storm's End is another one. So the wall, Winterfell, Storm's End 3. The High Tower, the version that stands today, which was supposedly the fifth version. I'm so not good at that. The fifth version of the High Tower, built by Uthor. Supposedly Bran the Builder helped him. Then we have Storm's End. I mentioned that, but going back, it said that Durran Godsgrief received help from a boy who would grow to be Bran the Builder, or maybe the Children of the Forest helped him shape the stones with magic. So Bran the Builder associated with those places: Storm's End, the High Tower, the Wall, and Winterfell. That's what he built. Now, those things are all very interesting places because they are all magical structures and they are all problematic for the history. They don't make sense. So we just said, the High Tower is built on a fused stone fortress. That one we've made sense out of. We've said it's, Dragon Lords from the east, but it's not First Men. It's a weird place. So I don't know about the tower on top, but it's definitely a weird place associated with the Great Empire of the Dawn. Then we have this whole thing about round towers. The Maesters are very, very sure that round towers are something that only the Andals figured out how to build after a certain point. The First Men built first ring forts and then squarish castles, like we see at Raventree Hall or the Night Fort. And round towers came later. Jaime says it, and it's in the World of Ice and Fire too. So Storm's End is weird. It's a round tower. It's the round tower. It is so well built that you can't fit a knife in between the stones. It does have seams. It's not fused stone, but to hold up against the battering waves and seawall, it's got to be fit super tight, so there's nowhere for erosion to take hold. So it's this stunningly durable castle. It's a single round tower. Like, that's kind of its whole thing. It's a big round tower keep. So who built it? Well, we're told it was built by Durran Godsgrief in ancient day. Whenever that was. That's way before the coming of the Andals. So the Maesters, they think that everything that's round tower is just a later Andal rebuilding. So who knows what the original Storm's End was, But because it's a round tower, we can assume the Andals built that version of it. Same for Winterfell. The oldest part of Winterfell is the first keep. That's the part that's right over the crypts of Winterfell, which is definitely the first thing there. The caverns. That's under the Godswood. So basically, Winterfell is a castle built around a weirwood, just like all the First Men castles. That's why they didn't level the land. And the first construction is the first keep. It's a round tower. Now, the Maesters would tell us it's been rebuilt many times. So originally it wasn't. However, it's got gargoyles on it that have been worn down by the rain so much that you can't even see what shape they are. So I don't know how long that takes, but it's possible the Maesters are wrong and that the first keep is in fact original. And it is the oldest part of the castle, even though it's a round tower. We're supposed to question the round tower thing. It's meaning like, no, the First Men couldn't, but there were people in Westeros building advanced structures, obviously, not just round towers, but freaking Storm's End, not to mention Moat Cailin, and the Wall, and this high tower. Okay? So Bran the Builder, he's associated with all these magic places. So who was he? Well, it's suggested that maybe he wasn't one person. Maybe, there's lots of Brandon Starks. So maybe Brandon the Builder is a title. It's a brand associated with multiple people. Multiple Starks. Maybe the ancient Starks were good engineers amongst the First Men. That's the story. What's up with Moat Cailin? You're going to have to wait for my Moat Cailin video. I will tell you exactly what's up with Moat Cailin. I have cracked that one, but that is not for today. So, Bran the Apprentice, the idea is that Bran the Builder could be a first man who learned construction techniques from the Great Empire of the Dawn. And the High Tower is the big clue about that. The High Tower is built by Uthor Hightower, who's an immigrant from the Great Empire of the Dawn. It's built on top of the Fused Stone Fortress, and it says maybe Bran the Builder helped him. Now, the Fused Stone Fortress is shaped with, those are stones shaped with magic. Stones shaped with magic, that is Valyrian fused stone. That's what that is. But weirdly, Storm's End legend says maybe the children helped during God's grief shaping the stones with magic. So there's a bunch of confused ideas. Bran the Builder, the children of the forest, shaping stones with magic, and during God's grief. But we know that Bran the Builder and shaping the stones with magic are both also associated with the High Tower. So starts to seem like some of this conflation might have arisen because Bran the Builder and some of these old locations, they were built either by the Great Empire of the Dawn or by right after most of these things would have been built right after the Long Night, because the Long Night is chaos, breakdown of society, collapse, long winter, the others. Then once that's over, we start rebuilding. That's when the new houses and the Age of Heroes really happened. When you've got, the first Starks and Lannisters, Durrandons, establishing houses that still exist to this day. That all would have happened right after the Long Night. So there definitely would have been people in Westeros who were from the Great Empire of the Dawn, or next generation, half Westerosi, half Great Empire of the Dawn. And they would have been copying some of those building techniques. Maybe they don't have dragons anymore, so they can't shape the stones with magic, but they do have some advanced ways of building castles, round towers, and really well fitted together stones that can withstand the punishing storms of Storm's End, or a tower that sits on top of a fused stone fortress that's lasted hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. Jenny of Oldstones, yes, Brandon of the Bloody Blade is absolutely a Nissa parallel. He murdered children of the... And thank you, this is a good one to mention. So Brandon of the Bloody Blade is a child of Garth the Green who sounds like who is also supposed to be an ancestor of House Stark. I could have made a slide for this, and it kind of goes here too. So we'll just pause the Bran the Builder thing. Garth the Green is operating in the Reach, and he's supposed to have many children, and all the houses of the Reach, and some in the Westerlands, are claimed descent from Garth the Green. He's also supposed to be the first king of the First Men. So all the old First Men houses technically come from Garth the Green, who is a green man. And the oldest First Men houses also have heavy skin changer links, like Stark. So the idea that the Starks come from the south originally, they would have. At some point, first men crossed the Arm of Dorne, wandered up north, and became Starks. So Brandon of the Bloody Blade seems like an ancestor of the Northern Starks, who is still in the South. And what does he do? He kills so many children of the forest at Blue Lake that it is filled with blood and is renamed Red Lake. So this is a bunch of things. One, the Bloody Blade that's a red blade. So that's Lightbringer. That's the red sword. He's murdering children of the forest. So again, this is tying together the murder of Nissa and the murder of children of the forest, like at the Isle of Faces. He's turning the lake red. That's like defiling of the Weirwood Net, breaking into the Weirwood Net. The Green Sea, the Blue Lake, that's normal clear water, it gets turned red. So we've seen that metaphor of blood flooding the sea, like Ygritte in Jon's vision. Ygritte dissolves into blood and bone in the Winterfell pond before the Heart Tree. Blood and bone of the Weirwood colors. Her blood becomes the pool. So it's like Nissa sacrificed, the Weirwood Net desecrated. So same thing with Brandon of the Bloody Blade. And then there's House Crane, which is also associated with Red Lake. They are a skin changer house. So it just shows like not only were they killing children of the forest, they were also breeding with children of the forest in that same area. And since the Bloody Blade can be a metaphor for the impregnating penis, then Brandon of the Bloody Blade, killing a bunch of children of the forest, was also potentially impregnating children of the forest. And again, all these First Men houses have skin changer genetics in them. So nice one, Jenny Oldstones. Doesn't it have something to do with his sister? Not that I know of, no. Oh, I think I know what you're saying. Rose of Red Lake is also a daughter of Garth. Brandon of the Bloody Blade, a son of Garth. So his sister is associated with Red Lake also, and she's a skin changer. They skin change into cranes. They're at House Crane. So yeah, it's not said that he killed his sister, but you're right, that is an echo of the whole Amethyst Empress brother-sister thing. Because House Crane, that is his sister. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Nice one, Jenny. So getting back to Bran the Builder. Bran the Builder sounds like first generation Great Empire of the Dawn Westerosi hybrid, potentially. Or just a Westerosi first man who learned stuff from the Great Empire of the Dawn. That's why he's able to build things, either with magic or with advanced building techniques or both. It is a very important link between the Wall and Storm's End, which are both Bran the Builder constructions, supposedly. And that is anti-shadow spells. Cold Hands cannot pass the Wall. And when he's asked why, he said, there are spells here, old ones and strong. Melisandre, same language about Storm's End. There are old spells here. No shadow can pass. Bloodraven's Cave also warded. So there is such a thing as a warding spell, a magic barrier that shadows cannot pass. And those are the only three places that we know are warded. I would suspect the Winterfell crypts as well, and probably any active Weirwood cave would be warded. But certainly Bloodraven's Cave, the Wall, and Storm's End. This is really the detail that lets us know Storm's End is not a fucking Andal castle. There I go, cussing. That's not the answer to Storm's End. Oh, the Andals built it later. No, it's a magical castle. It has spells set in it to prevent shadow demons from entering. So it is probably the case that all the First Men strongholds were castles that were built around Weirwood caves so that they could be warded. Storm's End has a Weirwood tree, a very ancient one, except for Melisandre frickin' burned it. Sacrilegious. But a giant Weirwood tree and obviously a cave system underneath the castle. So it's obvious. It's not that First Men castles built gardens in them and planted weirwoods. The weirwoods are eternal. The First Men built their castles around the weirwoods. They were huddling around the trees for safety, y'all. That's what they were doing. And because the weirwood trees were the center of their magic at that point. This is right after the Long Night. Or maybe in some cases just before. Like these sacred locations are established first. Later, they build castles around the Godswoods. And we can see that at the Night Fort, the castle's built around the Weirwood. So that's why these places are warded, the important one. So Storm's End is an important First Man stronghold against the others. It is warded against the others, just like the Wall. So I don't know if Bran the Builder built both of them, but there was probably a similar group of people or magic people. Yes, shout out Wiz the Smith, Hollow Hills essay. Drop the link. Please drop the link. You're a moderator, so you can. Yeah, that's the story. Like, Storm's End is an important First Man place. It is warded against shadows. That's also evidence that the others got very far south, and the fight against them wasn't just in the north. So yeah, Bran the Builder might have been more like Bran the Apprentice. Going back to the Fewstone Fortress at Old Town, what was really happening there? That's what we want to find out. We've got a lot of clues that Azor Ahai and the Great Empire of the Dawn, they're trying to get a hold of the Children of the Forest magic. They're breeding with Tiger Woman or the Langi or Nissa Nissa, the Elf Woman. Well, it's interesting. The legends on Battle Isle, one of them suggests that the mysterious ancient mariners who built the Fewstone Fortress and who came there and who were not first men, that maybe the High Towers descend from, why did they come here? To learn the magic of the Children of the Forest? Or perhaps to enslave the giants? We don't know. Well, it was definitely having something to do with the children and the weirwood magic, like I said, because that's the unique thing about Westeros. It does seem like they might have been enslaving the Children of the Forest, not the giants. You know, taking them, Azor Ahai is killing them in blood magic abomination rituals. So learning the magic of the Children of the Forest basically means breeding with them. That's how you become a skin changer or a green seer, is by having children with someone who has that gift, which means Children of the Forest. So what was going on at Battle Isle, where the Great Empire of the Dawn was coming? Sex with elves. I should have called this elf sex, I guess. But there's definitely an overtone of force and slavery and things like that. But definitely this is what was going on at Battle Isle. The Children of the Forest and the Great Empire of the Dawn were interfacing. Now, the Citadel was formed by the first High Towers. And it's this guy, Perwyn Hightower. He's the brother of Uthor, Perwyn the Lame. He basically collects a bunch of magicians and wise men and starts the Citadel, right? Because he's curious about the world because he has a crippled leg. Well, it says that the Children of the Forest were among those. Like the first maesters took counsel with the Children of the Forest. They learned from the Children of the Forest. And the first, the tradition of sending messages with ravens, it says the first men were teaching the ravens to speak the messages, which means they were skin changers using the ravens to talk and shit. And that writing notes came later. So we know the Children of the Forest, again, not only did they save the first men during the long night, and not only did the first men switch over to their religion, the children had an active hand with people. They were teaching them stuff. But here at the Citadel, or Old Town, it really seems to be one of the epicenters of those things. So there's a couple ways it could have gone, but there's a lot of Great Empire of the Dawn activity, and there's a lot of Child of the Forest activity. That's kind of what I'm trying to sketch out. The last part of that is the Isle of Ravens. The Isle of Ravens is not Battle Isle, but it is another island in the Whispering Sound. And it is actually inside the building of the Citadel. And the Isle of Ravens is where they keep the white ravens that they send out to tell everyone that winter is coming. Now, the Isle of Ravens, it has a huge weirwood tree, and the leaves are only on half of it, I believe. It also, the cool thing about it is that it has purple moss growing across its face. And I think that's a really important symbol because Jojen Reed's green eyes are always moss green. Those are green seer eyes, moss green eyes. So here we have purple moss covering the face of the weirwood, or part of its face. So it's almost like suggesting purple-eyed green seers, which would be dragon lords. And it says the Isle of Ravens used to be ruled by a pirate lord. But that's Azor Ahai is a pirate lord in the sense that he sailed here from the Great Empire of the Dawn. And so someone asked about Battle Isle. Like, what's they say, oh, what battle is this isle named after? No one knows. Well, it's probably a battle between the Great Empire of the Dawn and the native Westerosi. The High Towers were killing dragons here. So it kind of makes you think the High Towers were people from the Great Empire of the Dawn who fought on the side of the Westerosi against Bloodstone Emperor. That's always been the picture I've been able to sketch out. So yeah, Battle Isle, it would have been between these invaders from over the seas, who are the Great Empire of the Dawn, and the people who live there. That's what I would say. So the Isle of Ravens, the Pirate Lord, like that's probably a tangled up. I mean, there's probably was a Pirate Lord, but it's sort of a clue to us. Like Euron is a Pirate Lord, Azor Ahai. The Red Kraken is another Pirate Lord, Azor Ahai. And the reason why Azor Ahai is a Pirate Lord is because he invades the Weirwood Net, which is the Green Sea. So he's like a pirate. It's delightful. Daemon Targaryen is king of the Narrow Sea on Bloodstone Island. He's king of the sea, so he's kind of like a pirate lord. Orain Waters, he just set himself up as a pirate lord of the Stepstones. He's probably on Bloodstone Island, and he looks like Rhaegar, but he has green eyes. So it's like, oh, a green-eyed dragon who's a pirate lord. It's all the same symbolism. It's Azor Ahai becoming a green seer and living in the Green Sea, but as a pirate. So yeah, Euron is the best pirate lord, Azor Ahai. Couldn't be more clear. That's why he goes to Asshai and comes back. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, the giant high tower is a f***ing Weirwood symbol. It looks pink here, but it's actually a white tower. The sigil is a white tower crowned with red flame, and it's on top of a black stone fortress. The Weirwoods are white trees crowned with a head of red leaves, and the rotting leaves on the carpet are black. It's said several times. The Godswood, the leaves on the floor of the Godswood are black. So you got black on the bottom. And also the idea of dragons underneath the Weirwood. That's Bloodraven the dragon underneath the Weirwood tree. And Azor Ahai inside the Weirwood Net as a green seer. That's what that's all about. So the high tower, it's an important symbol. It's Lightbringer on top, crown of fire, red crown of fire. It's got a tree trunk, and then it's got the dragon stuff underneath. It's also like, it's a watchtower that you can see a long way from it. What's his name sits atop the high tower and does magic. The current Lord Hightower, Leighton. It's got like Palantir language and stuff. So yeah, it's a giant Weirwood symbol. Okay, moving along. From the west. Everyone loves this. Sun Chaser, Alyssa Farman. Did the Great Empire of the Dawn come to Westeros from the west? Well, the girth is a globe. Oh yeah, and all that Green Sea, I forgot to say Ravenous Reader's name, but of course that is her theory. As you all know, Ravenous Reader completely authored the Green Sea theory. That is hers through and through. And this was drawn by Ted Nasmith, the Hightower. So, did the Great Empire of the Dawn sail here from the west? It could be, because like I said earlier, they landed at Old Town and Starfall, from what we can tell. I'd throw Iron Islands and Casterly Rock in there. We'll get to that. So they may have sailed the other way. Now, George is specifically teasing this idea a few different ways, but this is really about the Alyssa Farman thing. So Alyssa Farman, she lived about, I think, 50 years before the Dance of the Dragons, and she basically was someone who had a Targaryen girlfriend, Rhaena Targaryen, an awesome Targaryen. And Alyssa Farman, not enough for her to be the girlfriend of a Targaryen princess. She wanted more. She had her own desires. She did not want to be a kept woman. She wanted to sail around the world. And to finance this activity, she stole 3 dragon's eggs from Dragonstone and went over to Essos and sold them to a Magister of Pentos and used that money to build Sun Chaser and 2 other ships. And then she took up a new name and showed up in Old Town, recruited some help, and then sailed around the world. And as you can see on this map from Atlas of Ice and Fire, which is Wordhead, thank you. So the journey starts out in Old Town, and they sail south and west, and they get down, they lose one of these ships here, right before reaching these 3 little islands, which they name after the Targaryen dragons, if I'm not mistaken. The 3 islands, they're named after the dragons. Then they sail from there. Basically, one of the ships turns back, and Alyssa Farman goes on. And the one that turns back has a really rough time. They try to sail to the Summer Islands and miss, and then they land on Sothoryos, and they're stuck there for like a year. Then Summer Islanders rescue them, bring them back to the Summer Islands, and then they limp back to Old Town and tell the story of how Alyssa Farman kept going. So that's the last known course of Sun Chaser. You can see right there. Now the thing is, that's on roughly a parallel with Asshai. I zoomed in. That's why this is... Okay, hang on. So you can see that if you go south and west from Old Town, and you're on a parallel with the Summer Islands, then you're also on a parallel with Asshai. So if they turn due west from there, then they would have ended up in Asshai. And that seems to be the Lomas Longstrider famously saw a boat in Asshai that looked like Sunchaser. And that's how we know she made it. And that she's Quaithe, which she might be. Because if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Quaithe helps Dany hatch those eggs. She's sending Dany dreams even before she meets Dany, in my opinion. But Dany is coaching Quaithe, at the very least, on how to use her dragons to take them to fight the others. That's what Quaithe is up to. Dany hatched the eggs that Alyssa Farman stole. So if Alyssa Farman is Quaithe, it's kind of delicious. And also, Quaithe / Alyssa Farman used to date Dany's ancestor. And so sees Dany with those eggs. And was like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool. I remember Rhaena. I see some Rhaena in you, you know? It's a very cool connection. So I think Quaithe is either Shara Seastar or Alyssa Farman. I do think she's specifically one of those two people. She's not a nobody. And both of those theories are really good. The Shara Seastar one is awesome because then you have Bloodraven tutoring Bran, his old girlfriend, Shara Seastar, tutoring Dany, and their possible child, Melisandre, about to resurrect Jon and tutor Jon. So it could be an old Shara Seastar Bloodraven triangle running this whole thing. So I don't know which theory I like better, but it's going to be one of them too. So there you go. That was a bonus theory, the Quaithe one. But the main thing Alyssa Farman shows is that you can sail to Asshai from Westeros, go in the other way. So the Great Empire of the Dawn very well may have come to Westeros, go in the other way. Pretty cool. Good stuff. So the Ironborn, I've got a crazy Ironborn video coming. It's actually going to be a 2-part video because it turned into an hour and a half script, and I'm not going to make an hour and a half produced video. I'm going to cut that in half. Okay, so the Ironborn, I'm going to explain this in more detail, but the Ironborn have legends of coming across the Sunset Sea. They say that they're not first men, and the first men don't have any maritime skill, whereas the Ironborn have incredible maritime skill, and in fact, their whole culture is built around maritime skill and lifestyle. So it's always seemed likely that they might not be first men. Oh, Kirsty is saying Cleopatra usurped her brother's throne, whereas Amethyst Empress was usurped. Oh, that's kind of cute. Never thought about that. The Iron Islands, the Ironborn, they definitely could be from somewhere else, right? Because they don't seem like first men. And their entire religion and culture is different. They don't worship weirwoods. They are totally different. They're just different in every way. They're Lovecraftian Vikings. Now, then we got the Farwinds. The Farwinds, they live on the Lonely Light, which is way out. It's 8 days sail past the Iron Islands, the Lonely Light. You can see it here. So there's Iron Islands, and then out here, the Lonely Light. That's an 8 days sail. That is a fly speck island. That is out in the middle of nowhere. So the Farwinds are weird. They have color-changing eyes. Their sigil is a ship against the sunset, which is basically a picture of a boat sailing at you from across the Sunset Sea, or at the very least, you're standing on the Lonely Light, looking at a boat, and you're looking west with the sun setting behind the boat. So this sigil is looking west across the Sunset Sea. That is the Farwind sigil. And at the Kingsmoot, they're the ones who say, hey, let's all build boats and just sail across the Sunset Sea. We'll go back to where we came from. Everyone will be a king, and there'll be lots to eat, and it'll be great. Lots of mermaids to fuck. So I have figured out that if the Ironborn, or some of the Ironborn, sailed across the Sunset Sea and landed on the Iron Islands that way, then what the Farwinds would be, they are not Ironborn who went out to the Lonely Light. They are immigrants who stopped before they got to the Iron Islands. And that's why they're weird. They are more like the old people, the original immigrants. They have color-changing eyes. It's suggested they might skin change walruses and sea lions and stuff, and whales. I don't know if they're skin changers or if those are actually distorted Squisher and Selkie legends. So they're not skin-changing walruses. They are like Selkies, like walrus people. They can change back and forth physically or something like that. Hard to say. but they are definitely weird, and they believe in the land across the Sunset Sea. So I think they are original Ironborn immigrants who stopped before they got to the Iron Islands. Because when they were first sailing across the Sunset Sea and looking for land, they would follow birds and stuff, fish. They'd follow the birds to the islands where they roosted. And so they would find any teeny little island on the way before they got to the Iron Islands. And there would be some people who stayed there. There would be some people who were sick and injured, been on the boat for 3 months, like, oh my God, get me off. They don't know if there's more land further out. So some people would stop. They'd set up a base of operations, and then some people would continue exploring on. But now at least we know we can go back to this place. So then once they find the Iron Islands, they come back, and most of the people keep going. But some people are going to stay on those little islands. Of course, somebody always stays. So that's the Farwinds. I'm sure of that. So the Ironborn some of them do come across. They either come from Asshai, or they come from some land north of Asshai, past the Grey Waste that we've never seen on the map. But something like that. So the Starks built a fleet a couple of times, but they don't have the same skill or culture as the Ironborn. But that is true. They have built fleets. Like eventually, the Red Wines eventually had a fleet and stuff like that. But the ancient first men didn't have seafaring skill. So then we've got the Weirwood Ark. So Naga's ribs, very obviously a Weirwood boat. Every time somebody sees them, they're compared. So Aeron sees them and he's like, they look like the trunks of tall, pale white trees. And Victarian's like, they look like pale white trees and they're thick around as the mast of a dromond. So he's like, they look like white trees or maybe boats. But the Grey King is said to have made a boat out of Ig, the pale tree that consumed flesh, which is obviously a weirwood. And again, weirwood's Yggdrasil, so that's Ig. So Grey King is said to have built a boat out of weirwood. On the shores of Old Wick, we find the frame of a giant weirwood boat, but it's been flipped over. And that's why it looks like the ribs of a sea dragon. The Vikings used to do this. They would either, on the bottommost picture, is a boat that's been flipped over and turned into like a shed. So it's a very small version of turning a boat into a hall. But more often what the Vikings would do is they would simply use the same construction technique to build a boat, and they would just flip it over and use it to make a long haul. And that's what you see in the upper two pictures. You can see it looks like an upside down boat with a keel. This is not my theory. This is an old forum theory I've built on it. But yes, it says the Grey King built a weirwood boat. That's what Naga's ribs are. Thing is, it's huge. They're twice as tall as a dromond's mast. A dromond is a big boat. The mast is at least as tall as the boat. So these ribs, which is just the hull of this boat, twice as tall as the mast of another big ship. So they're huge. And there's 44, so 22 on each side. It's a big boat. It's an ark. It's not a long ship. It's an ark. It's probably a long-range ocean-going vessel. It's more like a Summer Islander swan ship. Okay? So this is another suggestion that Ironborn came from somewhere across the sea, somewhere far. You would think the Weirwood boat is built in Westeros because that's where the Weirwoods are, but I don't know why you'd build the ark in Westeros and then beach it in Westeros. Maybe they sailed back and forth with it. I'm guessing there used to be weirwoods across the sea too, and that's where the ark was built. It was sailed by the Grey King to the Iron Islands, then it was flipped over and used to make a long haul, as one does. And the Grey King is said to basically have taught the Ironborn everything. He taught them how to sail, how to make boats, how to fish. Then he had a bunch of kids and established their culture. So he's one of these foreign settler people. Like, he seems like he came from somewhere else, more advanced, and taught a bunch of stuff to the people there. Now, you don't sail an ark by yourself. So Grey King is probably coming with a bunch of people from across the sea. And he's finding some people on the Iron Islands, and it is the meshing of that culture that became the Ironborn. So some Ironborn, they have a first man descent. They are basically first men who wandered out to the Iron Islands, either before it got shattered and disconnected from the land, because it might have used to have been connected, or people that just sort of got there on rafts and small boats. Then Grey King comes there with Great Empire of the Dawn people. And then during the long night, the whole thing gets cut off. It becomes a lost colony. And they developed their own culture over time. And that's the Ironborn. Very much related to the Great Empire of the Dawn. As are the Lannisters. Dun, dun, dun. Guys, I'm going to go get Cleo again. I just can't listen to her throw the tantrum. It rends my soul. I figured out why there was so much screaming. Goose was taking a bath in his water bowl and splashing water everywhere. Wasn't he, girl? Yeah, it was awful, wasn't it? It was awful. It's very upsetting. I'm so sorry that happened to you, girl. I'm so sorry. Lan the Clever, founder of House Lannister. He took over from the Casterlys, right? The Casterlys founded Casterly. We don't know who they are, but that's who Casterly Rock is named after. But then Lan the Clever comes from the east, just from the east, and he winkles Casterly Rock from the Casterlys. He plays tricks on them. Maybe he sleeps with the daughters. We don't know, but somehow possession of the rock passes to him. He might be a son of Garth the Green. That's one rumor. But the other one is that he's from the east. He is said to have golden hair, which he got by stealing the fire of the sun. He stole the gold fire of the sun and colored his hair with it. So he is another character like Azor Ahai and Grey King and Durin Godsgrief, Bloodstone Emperor, who was reaching into the heavens and stealing the fire of the gods in some form. The magic thunderbolt, the daughter of the gods, the magic meteor, some sort of fire of the gods thing, stealing it from the heavens. Lan the Clever, another character like that. And he comes from the east. Now, the Lannisters, they don't have blonde hair. They have gold hair. It is always gold. They make a big deal out of it, how it's not blonde, it's gold. Okay? Their eyes, emeralds. Over and over. Emerald eyes. Unless Cersei's are wildfire, they are emeralds. Now, there is no emerald emperor. Opal, amethyst, tourmaline, and jade. Yeah, there's not an emerald. There is a jade. But emeralds are gemstones. The Valyrian hair, we mostly think about it as silver, but it is actually silver and gold and platinum white. And the gold is more rare. The ones that have gold in the hair, that's like, oh, the rare gold streak. So that's kind of rare. So it could be that Lan from the east with gold hair is a great Empire of the Dawn person. And it kind of makes sense because he has superior tricks or magic or something that he uses to get Casterly Rock. And if we look at the map, Casterly Rock on the west coast. So if people from the Great Empire of the Dawn are landing on the Iron Islands, and they're landing at Old Town, and they're landing at Starfall, Casterly Rock is right in the middle of all those things. So land from the east, maybe land from the east who came from the west, or maybe he came over land, who knows? There's multiple scenarios here for how the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros. But Asshai is in the east. So he's a sun-stealing character. And yeah, that's it. There's not much else. That's about as far as it goes. But the Lannisters could be very ancient Great Empire of the Dawn people. I don't think that makes them Dragon Lords or anything like that. But they do kind of sweat the Dragon Lords. Like when Rhaena got the egg stolen by Alyssa Farman, when she was touring around the West, she stayed at Casterly Rock, and the Lord of Casterly Rock really wanted a dragon's egg. And then we have Jaime and Cersei doing a twincest thing like Dragon Lords and comparing themselves to Dragon Lords. So maybe that's all part of it, but I don't know. LAN, local area network, Wi-Fi. Did LAN invade the Weirwood? Well, I mean, it's a parallel, right? Yeah, so LAN invading Casterly Rock would be a parallel to Azor Ahai invading the Weirwood Net. Thank you, I missed that. So I don't know if, I'm not saying Lan the Clever is Azor Ahai, just like I'm not saying Grey King is either. But they are parallel figures. And that goes back to there being multiple Azor Ahai characters potentially. Multiple individuals with a similar magic who came from the Great Empire of the Dawn. If you think about it, like the rulers of the Great Empire of the Dawn are obviously magicians of some kind. The ones leading these expeditions, some of them will be magicians. So those are going to be the ones remembered as Lan the Clever, Grey King, whomever. But they're going to come with people and they're going to represent people. Their magic represents the technology of the Great Empire of the Dawn, the magical knowledge of them. So that's why they're parallel figures with similar legends. Okay, so that's Lan the Clever. Okay, it's time to get nuts. We're going deep into the world building. We're leaving Westeros for a bit. You guys want to go back east? Did he steal the sun or the sun? Well, he stole the bloodline, so it's kind of a dual meaning. Let's talk about the Tourmaline Brotherhood and Dany's boob. Qarth is what we're talking about. And I did a stream called Magic of the East, where I went into this in a lot more detail. So we're just going to do, obviously, the short version here. But Qarth is very obviously influenced by the Great Empire of the Dawn. How do we know that? Well, if we go to our map, what it says about the Great Empire of the Dawn is that even after the Long Night was over, it says that the Great Empire of the Dawn was not reformed, for all the tribes of men were suspicious of one another and went their own way. And we see that. It fragmented. There's Yiti and Jogos Nhai and people from the Fair and Herkun, Lengi, the Asshai. They were all part of the same empire, and then they fragment. So look where Qarth is. Right here, the Jade Gates. The Great Empire of the Dawn encompassed all of Yiti. And Yiti, like Bayasabad, Asabad, Tikwi, these are Yitish cities, or ones on the edge of Yitish influence. And Qarth is just around, like if you're following the coast here, Qarth is not far from Yiti. It is a short hop, skip, and a jump, an even shorter boat ride. Now, if we zoom out just a little, I will remind you that there are only 3 ways across the Bones, and much is made about this. They're like, if you go wandering into the Bones Mountains without a guide, you're screwed. You have to stick to one of these 3 paths. So when the people are fleeing the Great Empire of the Dawn, there's only a few ways they can go. They can go by boat, obviously. Catch a boat, you can go anywhere. But apart from that, you've got these 3 roads that lead over the mountains. The bottom one, the sand road, leads into the Red Waste and then south to Qarth. The next one, the stone road, it leads to the basically to Meereen and the lands of the Landmen, or it breaks off north from Yinishar, a Yitish name on the other side of the Bones, I'll point out, north to Vaes Dothrak. And the third road, the Steel Road, also goes to Vaes Dothrak. So we're going to talk about the Horse Lords in just a second. But the point is, if there's a mass exodus from the Great Empire of the Dawn, some people are going to go to Qarth because it is on the way, whether you're taking the Sand Road, whether you're going on the Coast Road from Asabad to Qarth, or if you're sailing, unless you go all the way south of Great Morak, you have to sail through the Jade Gates right next to Qarth. So Qarth is in position to catch a lot of traffic coming from the Great Empire of the Dawn. Then let's take a look at Qarth. What is it? It's this weird magic city that claims to be the oldest city in the world, right? Well, I think this is George's prototype for Great Empire of the Dawn. Like, he hadn't even fleshed out the map that much at this point. And when Dany goes there, the Undying present themselves in a false vision, right? It was a splendor of wizards, and they've got gemstones on their gowns and their armor, and there's women too, and the most beautiful music Dany ever heard. And they say 2 things. They say, we've waited, we knew you would come, we've waited for you for thousands of years. We sent the comet to show you the way, and would you like us to teach you the speech of dragonkind? It's very tempting. And just like Dany's vision of the kingly ghosts with gemstone eyes, this is a very similar vision. These elders, spirits, ghosts of these ancestors who seem to know about dragons, right? The gemstone ghosts were telling her to wake the dragon, and they had pale fire swords. These fake Undying vision ghosts, they have gemstones, and they're a splendor of wizards. So they're magic, gemstones, music, the speech of dragons, and we sent the comet. So there's some sort of starry wisdom people that can send comets. And again, remember I said there's clues about calling comets. This is one of them. So this is a lie, of course. It is meant to ensnare Dany. The real Undying are the husks. But the point is the vision they created to appeal to Dany. They're trying to pose as ancient people from the East who know about dragons. That's what they're trying to, that is the goal of their fake vision. So essentially what they're showing her, I believe, would be their memory of the Great Empire of the Dawn. That's what they would think would appeal to Dany. They're trying to show her the same vision that she got before with the kingly ghosts. That's how I read that. So we sent the comet. We'll teach you the speech of dragonkind. Like somewhere out there, there are people, or there were people in the Far East who could call comets and teach you the speech of dragonkind. The people from ancient Asshai, the great empire of the dawn. That's who could do that. So the Qartheen were faking that, but it shows you that it is a real thing, the fact they were trying to do that. The Qartheen custom of one bared breast is a shout out to the Nissa Nissa legend. Bare your breast and know that I love you best of all this world. Ugh. Nissa Nissa bore her breast. And it's also, again, the childbirth. That's another childbirth thing. You bare your breast to an infant. Lightbringer is a bloody sword. It's also like a bloody child. Yeah, when they pick up Stannis' Lightbringer, they wrap it up in a cloth and cradle it like a child. So the bare breast is the Qartheen tradition. It is, I believe, done because the Nissa Nissa legend is probably floating around Qarth. And remember, Qarth has the second moon legend as well. So the only places we hear about the moon cracking are Qarth and Asshai, the Azor Ahai legend. So Qarth basically is giving us a lot of vapors of the great empire of the dawn. And my favorite part of it is the Tourmaline Brotherhood. The Tourmaline Brotherhood, obviously named after the Tourmaline Emperor. The Tourmaline Emperor, very influential ruler of the great empire of the dawn. Very wise dude, wrote a lot of books. And so here in Qarth, we have the Tourmaline Brotherhood celebrating his traditions. And yeah, there you go. That's Qarth. There's more, but you can check out the Qarth video for that. The ancestors of the Dothraki and the other horse peoples of the grasslands, which apparently there are other horse peoples of the grasslands, remember crossing those mountains, the bones, from the lands that lay beyond. Did they come west in hopes of fairer fields and plenty, or in search of conquest? Or were they fleeing before some savage foe? Of their travails, we may be certain, for they left the bones behind, their bones behind, to mark their passing. The bones of men, the bones of horses, the bones of giants, camels and oxen, of every beast and bird and monster. All can be found amongst these savage peaks. So many bones that the mountains are named after the bones, for as long as anyone can remember. So this is really something. These mountains are so tall, the peaks look like they're floating in the sky. They're like the Himalayas. And yet, so many people crossed these. It was some sort of exodus that happened. Fleeing the Bloodstone Emperor, no doubt, in the collapse of the great empire of the dawn. We're told everyone went their own way. Well, some people went over the mountains. The Dothraki remember coming over the mountains. And we see the evidence in the mountains. There's so many bones. And it's not just people, it's animals too. Oxen and horses. So these are people that brought their animals. It reminds me of the wildlings when Jon sees them on the move. It's not an army, it's a whole people on the move, fleeing a deadly foe, the others. So here, we would have had the ancestors of the Dothraki fleeing the fallout of the collapse of the great empire of the dawn and coming over the mountains. That's the first part of this. That is a true memory. So it's two pieces of the puzzle. You know, the Dothraki remember coming over. There's bones in the mountains. And when we go over on the other side of the mountains, we find more horse lords, except for that they're Zorse lords, the Jogos Nhai. And they're much shorter than the Dothraki. And the Dothraki have like golden brown skin. The Jogos Nhai have browner skin, but it's a little bit more yellow. Okay. So the obvious implication is that they have some shared ancestry with the Yitish, who are basically Chinese people. And they are, fantasy version of Chinese people. And although not all Chinese people are short, that's very not true. Just to be clear, the idea here is that the Yitish are shorter than the Lengi. Like you see the picture of the Yitish man and the Lengi woman. She's like 2 feet taller. So the Yitish are shorter, quasi-Asian fantasy people. Their culture is drawn from our own Chinese and Japanese culture. I mentioned Sun Wukong. Amaterasu, the maid of light, is Amaterasu, Japanese sun goddess, for example. So Jogos Nhai have a shared ancestry with Yitish, but probably also the Dothraki, because these are both nomadic horse-riding peoples, and they're on opposite sides of this mountain range. But the Dothraki remember coming from the Jogos Nhai side. So what's interesting is the cultures. The Jogos Nhai, they have small groups that are banded together by blood ties, family groups. they do not war upon each other, ever. They're not allowed to. And the men lead in matters of war, but in everything else, the moon singers, the women, are in charge. So it's very matriarchal, dominated culture. The women also steal the men as husbands. It's like the opposite of the wildling custom. So there are these certain similarities and differences between the Dothraki and the Jogos-Nhai. But what's interesting, because the Dothraki, their bands make war upon each other all the time, and they're not very matriarchal. But here's the thing. When the Dothraki go back to their original home, Vaes Dothrak, then they lapse back into customs that are very similar to the Jogos-Nhai. Bloodshed is forbidden, just as bloodshed is forbidden between any Jogos-Nhai members. The women are completely in charge in Vaes Dothrak, just as the Moonsingers are in charge. And, what was the other one? Oh yes, the Dothraki bands are not family bands. However, they adopt each other with the whole Blood Rider ritual. So they are simulating the family bands of the Jogos-Nhai, and that makes sense, because when they were fleeing over the mountains, they would have been little broken remnants of family groups and clans that then had to band together and form new groups. So the adopting each other ritual makes a lot of sense for people fleeing over the mountains, doesn't it? And my favorite part of this is the Sarnori element. The Sarnori and the Dothraki are cousins. It is nowhere said, but it is obvious. They are both tall. They are both golden bronze skinned. They are both black haired. They are both horse cultures. They both have black eyes too, tend to. The only difference is that the Sarnori are an urban civilization and the Dothraki are steppe nomads. But it is very clear that they are genetically similar and that they both share a horse culture. So here's what happened. And the longer story, again, is in that Origins of the Dothraki video. But here's what happened. Some of the ancient common ancestors of the Jogos-Nhai and Dothraki fled over the mountains. There they encountered horses and taller people. They may have brought some horses with them, but the fact there are no horses on the other side is interesting. Like the Jogos-Nhai ride zorses because there are no horses there. So seems like the horses were mostly on the other side of the mountains. And there is the main difference between the Dothraki and the Jogos-Nhai is the Dothraki are very tall. Well, that kind of makes sense. The Jogos-Nhai have only ever had zorses to ride. So it would have been the shorter males among them who would have been more successful and passed their genes on because they would have been the better Zorse riders. You get too big, you can't ride Zorses. You have to build huts or something. It's not this glorified position in society. But then these people come over the mountains. Well, they're going to meet the natives of that area who were obviously taller and they were riding horses. So these steppe nomad people were like, sweet, we can work with these. These are just like bigger Zorses without stripes. And so over time, you have these cultures develop. The Sarnori culture is an urban civilization. And if you look at this map, you can see these two lakes here on the far left side. There's actually supposed to be three. These used to be the Silver Sea over there. And the Silver Sea is the home of the Fisher Queens and stuff. The Sarnori, well, we'll get to the Sarnori. They claim to descend from the Fisher Queens. But the point is, the Sarnori are very old. They are concurrent with Valyria. They were around more than 5,000 years ago already when Gis fell. So the Sarnori are a very old urban culture. They sprung up right after the Long Night because the Fisher Queens and all that stuff, that's pre-Long Night stuff. The sea breaking up into three smaller lakes, that's probably part of the Long Night disaster when everything froze and got colder. A lot of bodies of water would have shrank. Different things happened. Sea levels changed. So right after the Long Night, you have the Sarnori. And they establish a great, powerful urban civilization. And it says that the horse nomads had always been a minor pest on the outskirts of their empire for centuries and centuries. But after Valyria fell, the horse lords began to expand and raid into the territory of the Sarnori. And we know that over the course of the next 100 years, they wiped out the entire kingdom of Sarnor. There's a Genghis Khan-like figure named Kalmengo, the first one to ever unite the Dothraki clans, and he just lays waste to all these Sarnori cities. He turns them against each other. It's a slow process. The point is that what you see happening here is that this is steppe land. Like everything from the mother of mountains east to the bones, that's all steppe land. So the nomads, the Dothraki and the other horse peoples of the steppe have been there for centuries and centuries, just doing their steppe nomad thing. They are bottled up by the empire, the former empire of the Carthene in the south, and the empire of the Sarnori in the west. But after the Valyrians disappeared, a lot of other peoples expanded their power, and the Dothraki wiped out the Sarnori. But they were their cousins. These are cousin peoples. And even the Dothraki legends about the first rider coming out of the womb of the world, that emulates the idea of the Fisher Queens being the mothers of all mankind from the Silver Sea. So you can see the Dothraki mythology, it's got some of that Fisher Queen stuff, just like the Sarnori do. The last part of this is that the Dothraki have a religion that reminds us of the Great Empire of the Dawn. It's an astronomy religion. They believe the stars are their ancestors. And when Khal Drogo dies, for example, they believe that his spirit goes up and becomes the red comet. It becomes a star. Well, that's the same as the Great Empire of the Dawn, where the god emperor, when he was done, ascended back to heaven to join his forebears. So, Great Empire of the Dawn and the Dothraki alike believe their ancestors become stars and ascend back to heaven. And the Dothraki also have this strong taboo against blood magic, right? When Dany's about to do blood magic with Mirri Maz Duur, the Dothraki are like, have a strong, they're like, no, you don't do that. That's Azor Ahai and Nissa stuff. That's how you break the moon. It's bad, bad, bad. So they retain this taboo from somewhere. And that's where I think it comes from. And also you see these roads across the bones. 2 of them lead to Vaes Dothrak. So you can just see how it all played out here between the Sarnori and the Jogosnai and the Dothraki. And all of this is shaped by the fallout of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So next we have the actual Sarnori. So as I mentioned, Sarnori, we're talking about Azor Ahai. Well, Azor Ahai, that's the name of the founder of the Sarnori nation. He supposedly united the clans of 3 different people, the Gips, the Sokora, and the Cimeri, which is a shout out to the Cimmerians from Conan or whatever. But point is, this figure, Azor Ahai, with a name that sounds a lot like Azor Ahai, he unites the clans and creates the empire of Sarnor. He claims to be descended from the last of the Fisher Queens. So he's trying to wear the floppy ears of the local sacred symbol, the Fisher Queens. Oh yeah, I'm descended from them, and we're going to unite the clans, and I'm going to be the king. So he could be someone that is not from there. It is not clear. He could be someone in that group of people that came over the mountains and then conquered and united. Because he's obviously not Azor Ahai. Like, Azor Ahai can't go to Westeros and do all this stuff and also found the kingdom of Sarnor. It doesn't make any sense. But what if Azor Ahai is either a title or just a sacred name? And if Azor Ahai is somebody that is a refugee from the Great Empire of the Dawn that united local peoples, okay, then potentially his name is from the same language as words like Asshai and Azor Ahai. And that could be why his name sounds like Azor Ahai. It's Azor Ahai. He comes from similar culture. Could be. And he seems like I said, he could be a foreign conqueror type. Now, the last general of the Sarnori, who led one of the last armies against the Dothraki and lost, his name was Mazor Alexi. Mazor Alexi. Shout out to Mazor Rackham from Ender's Game. Mazor Alexi. So there's Azor. It's right there with an M in front of it. And if you were to take Azor Ahai and Mazor Alexi and mash them together, you'd have Mazor Ahai. And if we saw a name Mazor Ahai, we'd be like, really? Mazor Ahai? You're not Azor Ahai? So we're playing word games here, but it could be a clue from George that there is some cultural linguistic link and that these are titles of lords and kings, right? Just like we said, Tar means king. Ahai might mean God King. And so Ahai is just a variant of that, perhaps. So yeah, the Sarnori, the fact that they share some connection to the Dothraki means that Azor Ahai could be from the Great Empire of the Dawn. And that's really all I'm going to say about the Sarnori, because they're kind of tangential. And we need to talk about the ancient Andals. So we just said Azor Ahai Well, then there's this guy, Hugor of the Hill. And Hugor and Huzor sound very similar. Hugor of the Hill, he's the founder of the Andals. He had the gods pulled down 7 stars from heaven to make his crown. So not a star sword, star crown, but same idea. Divine authority coming from the stars. His wife, eyes of blue pools and supple as a willow, brought forth by the maiden herself. Well, willows are trees that grow by the water, and her eyes are like blue pools. So she sounds like a watery woman, maybe a mermaid woman, but also a tree woman because she's like a willow tree. So this is all Nissa stuff. Tree woman, mermaid, you know what I mean? So it's at least a symbolic echo. The god king that pulls down the stars, the tree woman, the founding of a nation. It's hard to say what the connection is. The Andals come from the Silver Sea area where the Fisher Queens were, so maybe this is a myth that's transmitted all the way across. I've always been stumped by this one. But the Silver Sea is a diaspora, as I've written there. It is a place where a lot of people come from. Carthene come from there, Andals, potentially the first men. That's where their journey might start. So, oh yes, there's also Hugo. There's another Andal hero called Hugo, and he slays the Swan Maidens. And the Maesters wonder if Hugo and Hugor are the same person. So Hugor has a watery tree woman wife, and Hugo slays the Swan Maidens. But like I said, mermaids, Nissa, Swan Maidens. And Azor Ahai kills his wife. He marries and kills the same woman. So, again, more echoes. Slaying the Swan Maidens, that could be like murdering Nissa and Children of the Forest. But the Andals are so disconnected geographically that, like, I don't know, these just literary parallels for us to notice or actual myth transmission. Hard to say. But one thing that does tease us is the idea that the Andal religion is astronomical. They have the starry sept. The 7 are tied to 7 celestial wanderers. The starry sept in Old Town's made out of black marble, so it's kind of got the vibes of your great Empire of the Dawn. So Marwyn the Mage is interesting. Marwyn the Mage is pretty obviously a member of the Church of Starry Wisdom. He hangs out in weird temples by the docks. That's where Starry Wisdom temples are. He uses a glass candle, just like Quave, who's also Starry Wisdom Church. So I think there could be an idea that, like with a Starry Wisdom Church, they infiltrate organizations. So maybe Relorism they've infiltrated. Starry Wisdom is founded by Bloodstone Emperor, and the Reloris believe in Azor Ahai. So maybe all this Starry Wisdom stuff with the Starry Sept, maybe inside the Andal faith is some sort of astronomical remnant here, which Starry Wisdom cultists have played up and shaped the religion over time. I don't know. I could never put this together into a coherent theory. It's just there's some parallels to notice. But it's interesting that the Andals ended up in Old Town with their center of their faith, the Starry Sept, when Old Town is where Bloodstone Emperor, who founded the Church of Starry Wisdom, invaded Westeros and built a castle, or his people built a castle. So I'm not sure how to connect that without like a Starry Wisdom cult shaping the Andal religion as it grows in Westeros. Let's get weird. Sothoryos. All right, so next up, GMO Valyrians. So we were just talking about Sothoryos being overrun with monsters of the Bloodstone Emperor. Well, if the Valyrians come from the Great Empire of the Dawn, let's follow this out logically. Like I said, the Valyrians, we know they have lizard DNA. Baby Rhaego on the bottom. That art is by Morgaine Le Fay, and the Dragon Lords on the top is by Magali Villanueva. That's Baby Rhaego, Dany's lizard baby. She's not alone. There's plenty of other lizard babies. Maegor had several. Laena had one. Rhaenyra has one. There's others too. I think there's at least one more. So all the lizard babies prove that there is reptilian DNA in the Targaryens and the Valyrians. There's no question. How did it get in there? Well, we'll get to the how in a second. The first idea is that, well, somebody did this. Potentially. Somebody created the Valyrians. So that would have been the Great Empire of the Dawn that would have created the Valyrians so that they can tame dragons, right? I mean, that's why there's all these weird lizard people experiments running around. It's one of two things. Either the Great Empire of the Dawn, either there were already lizard people because this is a weird Lovecraftian world with every sort of animal human just out there. And so they bred people with the lizard men and came up with Valerians. It's either that or they magically, and this is Dracomorph, we'll get to in a second, they combined lizard DNA and human DNA. And some of those, the results of that combination were failed experiments, some of whom were still viable. So you got these lizard men or eyeless men. It's not what we were going for, but they escaped and started breeding and made a population in the wild. So it's hard to say which order it goes in. Either one could make sense. But it is no coincidence that there are lizard people lurking all around the borders of the Great Empire of the Dawn, near Asshai and Sothoryos. I have to think these, making lizard people, it's not easy, right? It's like, you don't get it right the first time you try it. And I'll explain, I have a specific theory why there are failed experiments, which is Dracomorph. We're going to get to that. But the first thing I'm trying to key in on here is that even before you get to the how, when you realize that the Valerians are created so that they can bond with dragons, you have to ask the who. Well, Septon Barth says men from the shadow might have taught the Valerians their arts of how to bond with dragons. Well, you don't teach people how to bond with dragons. You have to be the blood of the dragon to bond with dragons. Isn't that right, Cleo? So when it says that men from the shadow taught the Valerians how to bond with dragons, it means that they bred the Valerians. That's what it means. The men from the shadow, the men from Asshai, the great empire of the dawn. So that's GMO Valerians. The Valerians, they're not necessarily the most powerful people from the great empire of the dawn. The people who created the Valerians would have been the most powerful people. The Valerians might have even been like a slave race that were just made to control the dragons. They probably had magical controls over the Valerians so that they could control the dragons, the people who made the Valerians. Or maybe the lords of the great empire of the dawn then married their children into these Valerians so that they would be dragon lords. Who knows? But the Valerians, they are a part of the great empire of the dawn, created by the great empire of the dawn to ride dragons. So how do we do it? How did we create the blood of the dragon? Well, some of you know the answer. It's Dracomorph time. Woo! Let's get wormy. Okay, so Dracomorph is simple. It's not simple. Nothing is simple. But if you've seen the movie Aliens, it won't be that hard to see. And everyone's seen Aliens. The chest bursters, that aliens, the face huggers. You don't forget the face huggers once you see them. Possibly the single most terrifying thing in science fiction. Oh. Okay, so Aerea Targaryen hopped on the back of Balerion the Black Dread one day and accidentally went to Valeria and came back a few weeks later with worms inside of her. This is a freaky story from Fire and Blood. George spends a disturbing amount of page time on this story, to be honest. The key thing about Aerea's worms, they are some sort of worm parasite. She picked them up in Valeria, probably. The only other place is maybe Sothoryos. But they suspect Balerion would have flown back to Valeria because that's his home, it's where he's from. That makes sense. So Aerea's worms, they are a parasitic worm. They're probably from Valeria. And they burst out of her like the chest burster in Alien. Septon Barth is trying to treat her. They're growing larger. They're writhing under her skin. He puts her in a tub of cold water and they break out of her. They die in the cold water. So it was like a good idea, but she dies too. She's burning up from the inside. So it was a mercy, obviously. But the worms burst out of her, alien style. The important thing about the worms is that they have hands and faces. And they have human-like cries. Hands and faces. This photo, by the way, it's the Bloodstone Emperor from Lineage 2 above. The bottom is a fireworm by Kevin Catalan. We do not know that Aerea's worms are the same thing as fireworms, but they could be. More likely, they are related. They are creatures of fire. They roast Aerea as they grow. They cook her. Her skin chars and cooks. So they are hot worms from Valeria. They may or may not be baby fireworms. Maybe baby fireworms have to incubate in people. I think this is something slightly different, though. So these worms, they break out of Aerea. They have human hands and faces. How did they get human hands and faces if they're worms? Worms don't need human hands and faces. That's not an evolutionarily advantageous trait. Worms are tunneling animals. They have worm traits that are good for tunneling, okay? All digging animals. They're going to have small eyes that are protected, claws or bodies that can dig. Worms don't have any appendages to like get caught on stuff, so they can just wriggle through things, right? These worms have human hands or faces. That's not what you'd want if you're a worm. So I think what happened here is these worms combined with Area's DNA. So that's what happened. These are parasitic worms that, just like the alien, are combining with the DNA of their host as part of their life cycle. Because that's what's happening in Aliens. The facehuggers plant an alien baby inside of you, but it combines with your DNA. So the aliens that are born, they have human DNA in them. And the aliens can combine, the xenomorphs can combine with any species and make new hybrids. And that's what George is copying. So these worms, they got in Area. They came out with some human features, human hands and faces and worm bodies. So not lizard people, but kind of lizard people. More like people like lizards, people lizards. So Area's worms, they show us a mechanism, potentially, for combining reptilian DNA and human DNA. And that's just what the Valerians were said to do, again, on Gagossos. They did horrible experiments. They combined human and animal DNA. It says they mated humans and animals. But I'm sorry, there's no lizard bleeping here. Nobody is bleeping geckos and things. That's not what's happening. It's not a matter of putting on some Barry White and talking a Komodo dragon into a tumble in the hay. That's not what this is about. These are horrific blood magic experiments. They were using the worms. They were putting these worms into people and letting them hatch and create hybrids and just seeing what came out. That's what they were doing. And every once in a while, they might have gotten a viable hybrid species that they could then breed back into humans or lizard people or whatever until they got what they wanted, which was a human with just a little bit of reptilian DNA that could bond with dragons. And the thing about worms are the common denominator here. The Targaryen lizard babies are all worm-like. They're frequently blind and they have worm tails. Maegor, who had all the lizard babies, it's said that his seed is wormy. And even some of the deformed dragons are born like worms. And there's one in particular, Laena Velaryon. They put a dragon's egg in her cradle and it hatched, instead of a dragon, it hatched a weird worm thing that attacked her. And Corlys Velaryon himself killed it in the cradle, bit her arm. But if you think about this, this is another part of the aliens picture. So with the Area, we got the chest burster. So this egg that hatches in the cradle of Aela's daughter, it hatches a worm that attacks the baby. So that is very much like the alien scene where the chest burster hatches out of the egg and attacks the captive human that's been slimed up against the wall. So it's another part of the process. Now, this worm, this deformed dragon worm that attacked her, is probably not the same worm that Area had inside of her. But if we imagine that it was, we have the whole sequence from Aliens where an egg hatches, a worm comes out, attacks a captive human, infects them with worms, and then breeds and pops out a hybrid species. Now, again, these are two different scenes, but if you paste them together, you have the entire thing from Aliens. And I think George is giving us these pieces to make us think about Aliens so that we will figure out how the blood of the dragon was really created, which is with worms. So watch my Dracomorph video and watch also Crowfood's Daughter's 2 videos about the origin of the blood of the dragon. She's the one who started this train of thought. I took it further. She made some really crazy discoveries about the worms that I've been sharing. And the thing about Gagossos is that after Valeria, Gagossos being the place where they did all these experiments, after the Valerian Empire collapses, 77 years later, Gagossos, like 9 out of 10 people on it die from the Red Death, where they just start bleeding out of all their orifices and then burn up and die. Crowfood's Daughter suggested this is just an earlier phase of the worms. Because Area is a Targaryen, she has a higher tolerance to heat. Not fireproof, but a higher tolerance to heat, absolutely. So Area, she stayed alive a lot longer. She was a good host for the worms. She let them grow a long time before they hatched out of her. And that's what you want if you're breeding stuff. That's the clue. But these people on Gagossos, when the Red Death broke out, these could have been the worms. And it's just that before they get bigger, and if it's a host that can't live as long, you just start bleeding out of the orifices, which Araya was. So Crowfoot's daughter thinks the Red Death is a worm disease that broke out on Gorgassos, because after the Valerians were no longer in control of the breeding program, all the stuff on the island would have gotten out. And sooner or later, the worms got into everybody, and everybody died. So check out that video, because that's freaking sick. So yeah, I think this is how we got the blood of the dragon. I don't see any other guess. How do you get lizard DNA inside of people? Nobody's ever had a specific guess. It's just like weird experiments. Well, Araya's worms tell you how. This is how you combine DNA with the worms. And this is the suitably awful truth behind something like the blood of the dragon. It wasn't going to be nice, right? It's Dracomorph. Okay, moving into the final stretch of theories of the iceberg. We're going back to the Isle of Lang. I already said this a little bit, but now let me fill you in about the old ones. And I've got a series called The Secret Origins of the Green Men with a longer story. One of them's called the Isle of Lang. It's the first one. So, on Lang, in Ice and Fire, there are cities in the jungle, and they go deep underground. And that's where the old ones live. We don't know who the old ones are, but the god Empress of Lang occasionally has congress with the old ones, supposedly. And because the Langi are so tall, and because they have golden eyes that are non-humanoid, we can assume that they have bred with the old ones, and that is why they are so unique as people. So that gives us clues about what the old ones start to look like. They are tall, and they must have golden eyes, and they must live underground. The idea of old ones living on Lang is taken from Lovecraft. In Lovecraft, well, there's two versions of Lang. One, it's a city in Antarctica, but the other version of Lang is an island. And on this island, which Randolph Carter flies over on the back of a shantak, which is basically a wyvern, he sees fires in the night. And he sees strange animals. Oh, good question, Ganessa. I'll get you that. He sees strange creatures, goat-legged horned humans. You can see the picture on the right. That's a man of Lang. They dance around the campfires and conduct unholy rites at night. These goat-horned men of Lang. And what are they worshiping? They're worshiping the old ones. Now, in Lovecraft, the old ones are ancient, unfathomable beings. It's kind of like a class, like the deep ones and the old ones. I think they're different groups, but they're related. The point is, the old ones are not satyrs. The old ones are beings, millions of years old, but they are associated with underground cities. And the men of Lang, which the underground cities are on Lang, the men of Lang worship the old ones. So George has shuffled this around a little bit, where his Lang, the old ones are the horned people that live in the jungles and the underground cities. And it's the Langi who fear them and occasionally worship them. Okay? And the way that I figured this out is without the Lovecraft stuff. The Lovecraft stuff was just confirmation for me. I was thinking about tall, golden-eyed beings on Lang. And it occurred to me, I just found this phrase, the old ones. George uses the old ones, the phrase old ones, to refer to the green seers and the green men over and over and over. And I demonstrated this in the video, but it's like Ned's gods were the old ones, the silent gods of the Weirwoods. And it's like, oh, the gods of the Weirwoods are the old ones. That's interesting. And it happens over and over. Jon tells somebody, oh, you pray to your new gods. I'll pray to my old ones. So it's like, oh, the old gods of the Weirwood. They're the old ones. There's like 10 more examples like that. One of the best one, there's a jailer named Garth at White Harbor who talks about the old ones. His gods are the old ones. You don't know nothing about them. So the old ones in Ice, George is telling us, the old ones are the gods of the Weirwood. Well, who are the gods of the Weirwood? They're green seers. And the ancient green seers seem to have been green men. Garth the Green was a green man. The Order of Green Men is on the Isle of Faces, the hub of the Weirwoods. So, old ones, gods of the Weirwood, those are green men. So you go over in the jungles of Lang, there are old ones. And the people of Lang are tall with golden eyes. So, perhaps the old ones are the green men. And perhaps the green men are tall. And they have golden eyes, like the green seers of the Children of the Forest. Children of the Forest actually all have golden eyes. So the green men have always seemed like a cousin race to the children. And I believe they are the same as the old ones. Also, Lang is called a holy isle, just as the Isle of Faces is a holy isle where the green men live. So they went from one holy isle to another. Neither one likes tourists very much. You can't sail to the Isle of Faces. You get lost, or the ravens chase you away, or the winds blow you away. And if you land on Lang, you might get executed, because they like to kill all the foreigners. 4 times in their history, they've executed all the non-Langi on the island at once, which sounds like a big act of blood magic. I don't know if the old ones are associated with that on the Isle of Faces or anything. Oh, wait. Yes, they are. So the point of the old ones' green men thing, besides explaining where the green men come from, because remember, Garth the Green comes to Westeros across the land bridge, supposedly, but he's not from there either, and he's a green man. So the green men, we know they come from somewhere else. The Isle of Lang is the answer. So now, when we think about the Great Empire of the Dawn marrying god empresses, the god emperors marrying god empresses, these god empresses are descended of the old ones who are the green men. So what does that mean? That means that the Great Empire of the Dawn has been mixing with green seers for a long time. They're breeding with children of the forest in Westeros. They're breeding with the old ones on Lang. Where does it begin? Where does it end? We don't know. But it seems like this rabbit hole goes pretty deep. So just to go back to this question about Dany and the Danes. Should we be paying more attention to the Dane bloodline with Dany? Yes. Deanna Dane, Egg's mom. Egg married Black Beth of Blackwood. I sometimes say that Egg married Diana Dane. That's his mom. That is not true. Maekar married Diana Dane. Egg married Black Beth of Blackwood. But after that, their kids had incest and their kids had incest. And then we got Dany and Rhaegar. So Dany and Rhaegar are half Blackwood. That's not how genetics works, I know. But they have as much Blackwood blood as they do Targaryen blood. And their Targaryen side is half Dane, 1 generation back. And that is why Dany could wake dragons. I guarantee you that is why. It is just impossible that George Martin made the last 2 houses to contribute genetics to Targaryen before the birth of Rhaegar and Dany to be House Dayne and House Blackwood, the 2 most mysterious and magical houses in the story. That can't be an accident. And since we've proven that the Great Empire of the Dawn is connected to the Danes, and we know the Blackwoods are connected to Greenseers, what does that mean? It means that we needed Greenseer blood, and Dany is as much Blackwood as Bloodraven. I want you guys to understand that. Bloodraven is a Greenseer because he's half Blackwood. Dany is half Blackwood. So if she fucks around with the Weirwood net, don't be surprised. It could happen. And her latent Greenseer or Skin Changer abilities could have something to do with her ability to wake the dragons. Because remember, she is psychically connecting with Drogon while he is inside his egg. She sees him twice in dragon dreams before he's born. That could be Quave. It could be that dragon eggs have a spirit already and can always send out dreams. Maybe that's why they put eggs in the cradles. I've speculated that. Because then the infant can start contacting the dragon before the dragon even hatches and developing that psychic connection. That's what happened with Dany. She psychically connected with Drogon before he hatched. There's a chat above that one. Okay, Christy, I'll go back for it. So the reason Dany hatched the eggs, to me, she got an infusion of Great Empire of the Dawn blood from the Danes. That's OG Dragonlord blood. And she got the Greenseer blood. And that, I think, is what this is about. Because remember, how do you stuff spirits inside of dragons? Skin changer magic. That's lemur theory. So the dragon bond has 2 parts. One is we need reptilian DNA inside of people. That's Dracomorph. But we also need Valyrian ancestor ghosts inside of dragons. And maybe that can be done with some sort of blood magic. Thanks, Black Dread, for gifting memberships. That's so nice of you. Got a whole bunch of new squishers now. Can use all the emojis. And 1 free super chat message a month. So the 2 halves of the dragon bond, the other side is putting the spirit inside the dragon. And that might be done with Greenseer magic. So that would make sense of the idea that Dany needed Blackwood blood. Why did she need Blackwood blood? It's because the original dragon bond was created with Greenseer magic, an altered form of it. Maybe. So this is how this starts to tie together. And Jon, of course, is also a skin changer and a Valyrian. But Dany is too. I mean, she's not a certified skin changer, but she's half Blackwood. So just want to be clear. And again, genetics are more random. So it's not half because you're kind of randomly pulling from genes, but you know what I'm saying. So Holy Isle of Lang, just another avenue for the Great Empire of the Dawn to be mixing it up with green seers and stuff. That's kind of the point. So were the god emperors themselves green seers? I've suggested that Azor Ahai, Bloodstone Emperor, broke into the Westerosi Weirwood net, but were the older god emperors perhaps green seers? Oh, I should go back for the question before I move on. Sorry. Okay, let me go this back. Oh, this is a day. Okay. Does this mean Dany's dragons have Khal Drogo's spirit inside them? One assumes it's just the normal Targ line, but I've wondered this. Potentially. It could just be that his death paid for the life of the dragons, but there could have been a spirit transfer. Miri Maz-Dur was burnt up in the fire, so that is possible too. I love Lang. Okay, so the god emperors, were they green seers? The term god emperor is taken from Dune, and the god emperors of Dune are called god emperors because they are psychic. They turned into worms, which is kind of like lizard people, and they had long lives, but the main thing is that they're psychic. That's why they're all powerful. So Bran is a psychic. The green seers are kind of like psychic god emperors. And Bran compares very well to Paul Atreides and especially his son. And Quinn can talk about this more. But there's definitely some literary parallels. It's just the idea of like humans with psychic abilities. What kind of dark roads would this go down? And we see that Bloodraven is this Machiavellian character with the Weirwood net behind him. And is that a good thing, right? Of course it's a good thing. Always listening. Hashtag. So Bran is comparable to the god emperors of Dune in theme and in literary sense. So were the god emperors green seers like Bran? Well, it seems like they could be. They had long lives. They ruled a huge empire. It certainly makes sense if they were magicians. I certainly think they were magicians. But all these clues show that they are mixing it up with green men and children of the forest and stuff like that. And they're using magic to create hybrids and things. So this would all make a lot of sense if they were green seers. It's like, it's the thing that fits. And then if you go back to Karth and the idea that Karth retains a memory of the Great Empire of the Dawn, they have a group of people called the Pureborn who sit in wood thrones of their ancestors, which sounds like green seer thrones that have the spirits of their ancestors inside them. And if you read the paragraph, it's like the Pureborn of Karth, they're cut off from the world and they just dream all day. And it's like, oh, this sounds like green seers. So I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying George is creating a scene that reminds us of green seers. So it could be that just another clue that there are green seers there. And of course, the shade trees, right? That's where we're going next. This is one of the biggest pieces of evidence. Everybody always wants me to tell them about the shade trees. By the way, that was Urtach Altanaz. This one is Soldat Nordskin. The shade trees. I mostly like them as symbolism. They're easy to understand. They are corrupted. They look like inverted or corrupted weirwood trees associated with shade of the evening, i.e. the long night. The Undying are cold blue shadows, like the others are cold shadows that look blue in the snow. The Undying are gathered around a cold blue shadow heart, just like the heart of winter. They are trying to steal Dany's magic and life, just like the others, I believe, would want to steal Dany's magic and life, and Jon's too, because they're kind of vampiric. And then Drogon roasts them, just like Drogon's going to roast the others at some point. So it's a really good parallel. Great symbolism. But what are the shade trees really? And I've never had an answer. Not a hard answer. The best answer, they used to be weirwoods and something different happened to them, but more likely they are a cousin species. They enable similar but different effects. So they also have a psychedelic brew, like the weirwoods. And if you keep taking it, the shade of the evening, you will eventually become like the Undying, with an extended lifespan, but compromised physical presence. They're sort of insubstantial and ghostly. And you get the feeling they sit around in that room motionless for years until they have a visitor. And they use up all their energy trying to vampire them. I bet you that's how it goes. The rest of the time, they're having very stale arguments about very old things. So it's similar to the green seers extending their lifespan and slowly losing their physical body and becoming spirits in the weirwood net. It's obvious parallels. Bran's Weirwood Paste chapter is very similar to Dany's chapter. There's even that little dwarf outside the House of the Undying, only comes up to Dany's knee, like 1.5 feet tall. What is that? It's not a child of the forest. It's just some tiny, tiny little man. but it's really there. She's not drinking. She's not having visions yet. This is outside the temple. It's a real humanoid thing. There are people that are 2 feet tall in Ice and Fire. That is canon. We don't think about that, but there are. What does that tell you? It just tells you the history of humans is really weird. There are lots of sort of humanoid-like things running around. Children of the Forest, Nathi, winged men, lizard men, and that little friggin' dwarf outside the House of the Undying. Now, it does work as a parallel to the children, and the children serve Bran the paste, the dwarf serves Dany the drink, right? So the warlock trees, they function similarly to the weirwoods. That's what we can say. Are they related to the weirwoods? Did they use to? Who knows? But they are magic trees that enable psychic visions and long life, just like the weirwoods. And they're in Essos. So, are they only in Karth? Or, I mean, that would be weird if they were only in Karth. I understand that the warlocks are cultivating them, but shouldn't they be growing wild somewhere? In Sothoryos or the Asshai Peninsula or Mosavi? That sounds like maybe a place you'd find some. We don't know, but there are weirwood-like trees in Essos. And so I'm putting together a picture. On Lang, there may be weird green men. Near Lang, in Karth, there are strange alt weirwood trees. Then we have the Ifakevron, north of the Dothraki Sea, in this other forest called the Forest of the Ifakevron. It's huge, though. Look at how big it is. It's huge. It's as big as the Red Waste. It's giant. It's the size of the kingdom of Sarnor, but it's a forest. And in that huge forest are children of the forest. Lomas Longstrider doesn't see them, but he sees haunted grottos and carved trees. And the Dothraki supposedly revered the Ifakevron until the hairy men wiped them out. There's probably still a few, though, because those forest elves are kind of hard to catch, unless you're on enough DMT. But whether they're still there or not, as of a few hundred years ago, they were still there. The Dothraki not wiped out, but they took a vicious retribution on the hairy men. So the Ifakevron did not go unavenged. But basically, yeah, the Ifakevron are children of the forest or something similar, doing something similar with trees in that forest. He did not say if they were weirwoods. So maybe those are shade trees. They're a lot closer to Karth than they are Westeros, aren't they? There are some sort of magic trees there. And I should go back to the Summer Isles and tell you that they keep their records by carving them into these trees called tall trees. And we don't really know what that's about. Maybe that's a similar ritual or just a parallel. But they have the golden heart wood that they make their boats and bows from. Yeah, it's going deeper. That's the point. So there's also the Jogwin. So right next to the Ifakevron, you can see the realm of the Jogwin. It's the northern part of the Bones Mountains. They were supposedly exterminated by the Jogos Nhai, who, by the way, are tough as nails. The Jogos Nhai war on everyone. They wiped out Herkun. They've kicked Yeti's ass a bunch of times. They reduced the kingdom of Nefer to one little city that's like on the ocean in the side of a cliff. And it's underground. So yeah, don't mess with the Jogos Nhai. But the Jogwin, they were supposedly stone giants that lived in the mountains. There's no reason not to believe it because there are giants in Westeros. So why not here? This is the point. Like, you put it all together, it's like, okay, so on Lang, there might be old ones. In Karth, there are weird weirwood trees, alt weirwood trees. In the forest of the Ifakevron, there are some children of the forest like beings, presumably with some kind of magic tree. And next to them is a realm of giants that used to live. So the picture that emerges is that before humans spread out over the face of the earth, this was a magical planet. It was covered with magic trees and giants and children of the forest and strange humanoids. And then humans came along and pushed all that stuff to the margins with their expansions. And occasionally, more than occasionally, humans interacted with all these other species and they shaped human evolution. That is the picture that begins to emerge. And that is why the Dothraki used to be skin changers. We just said that they, and I'm dead serious, they used to worship or held sacred the Ithakevron. What does it mean to worship the children of the forest? It means to practice their practices. And all the people, the first men who worship the children, are part children. They are skin changers. Now, the Dothraki, you see the first one is wife swapping. Okay, and by the way, this art is by Smertui. So the Dothraki, their bond with their horses is more sacred than their marriage bonds. They will not let anyone else ride their horses. They will occasionally share women, but they will not share horses. That's cargo cult skin changer stuff. Okay, if the Dothraki used to skin change their horses, they would not let anyone else ride their horses, just as skin changers don't share animals. Now, anyone who rides a horse can tell you the connection between the rider and the horse is very intense and very close and instinctive. And it's established over hours and hours and hours and years of training and bonding. So given that humans can skin change animals, fucking birds and all kinds of stuff, horses would be a no-brainer. They are smart. They are animals that get along with humans. And they're animals that humans spend a lot of time with. So of course there should be horse skin changers. The Dothraki are great candidates. They came from the Great Empire of the Dawn. Maybe they were already magical, but they landed in the steppes just over the bones, right next to those Ithakevron. So you got the Mother of Mountains in the steppes. So before they interact with the Sarnori, they are interacting with the Ithakevron. And this is 8,000 years ago, guys. So that forest was teeming with little elves back then. So the Dothraki culture was no doubt shaped by those interactions. And that is why the Dothraki would have become skin changers. And the proof, well, Brandon and Lyanna, who were unexpressed skin changers, obviously they didn't have wolves, but what is it said about them? They rode horses so well that they were half centaur, which is a joke. Centaurs are half human, half centaurs. I think that's what it says. In any case, they're either called centaurs or half centaurs, but the point is, a centaur is like a horse-human hybrid. So you're talking about a centaur is just a centaur in Ice and Fire is a horse skin changer. So there are legends of centaurs in around the Silver Sea, and that no doubt probably just refers to the ancient Dothraki. The Maesters even guessed that. They're like, oh, that's probably just Dothraki. But yeah, it's Dothraki skin changers. The proof of this is vegetable Drogo. Mirri Maz Duur, with a bronze leaf-shaped blade that would have looked great in the hands of an ancient first man. What does she do? To resurrect Drogo, she cuts the throat of his animal, the horse. And she says, strength of the horse, go into the rider. So she is killing the animal. So if we imagine Drogo as a skin changer, she's killing the animal and sending the spirit or the strength of the animal into the rider to save his life. That's what he's doing. This is how Jon's going to be resurrected, by the way, because Jon's spirit is going to be in Ghost. So not only are we sending the strength of Ghost into Jon, we actually have to send this combined Jon Ghost man-wolf spirit back into Jon's body. And it's going to be done. The wolf is going to have to die either by throat slitting or fire. So essentially what I'm saying is that Mirri Maz Duur used a skin changer resurrection ritual on Drogo, knowing full well that it would turn him into a vegetable and not fully resurrect him. That is what I think she did. And the thing is, if Drogo had been an ancient Dothraki, it would have worked. Because when his spirit is teetering on the brink of death and he's lost consciousness as a vegetable, I'm guessing that at that point, if he was a skin changer, his spirit would have gone into his horse. So his vegetable body is sitting there dying. His spirit is fluttering and going into the horse. So then you kill the horse and send that all back into the man, use the blood magic to power the resurrection, cram all the spirits inside, and then you've got a horse man resurrected. That's what would have happened. It may be that the spirit of the horse was sent into Drogo, but Drogo wasn't whinnying and acting like a horse. So he just turned into a vegetable. I don't know if the horse was in that vegetable. That's funny to think about. But yes, it has all the hallmarks of the Jon Skin Changer resurrection ceremony that we think is coming, and Mirri Maz Duur did it on Drogo. I think that is because the Dothraki used to be skin changers. That is centaurs. So who are the maze makers? This is a real deep question. Here's what we know. On the Isle of Lorath, there are mazes. They are somewhat above ground, and they go much deeper underground. They are made of stone. They are all carved stone. This art is by Sven Sauer. This is Lorath. The mazes are made of stone. They go hundreds of feet underground. Stop me if this sounds familiar. Oh, yes. It sounds exactly like Leng, where there are underground cities that are carved into the stone, and they go hundreds of underground. Now, the maze makers, we only know a few things about them, but one thing that we know is that their skeletons are very large, larger than average men, but not as big as giants, which puts them at 8 or 9 feet. That is about the same height as the Langi, about 8 feet. So what we know about the maze makers is that they have large skeletons, about the size of the Langi, potentially. They live in underground cities, like the old ones on Lang. And they were murdered by Selkies. That's what we're told. That's the only thing we know, apart from their skeletons and they built mazes, is that they were maybe wiped out by Selkies or walrus men, which is really all the same thing. Merlings, deep ones, squishers, all the same shit, okay? So here's the thing. There is apparently a running war between the stagmen and the squishers. And we see Crowfoot's daughter found this. Amongst the wildlings, there are antler hat men and there are walrus men, and they hate each other. Garth the Green, one of his children was Owen Oakenshield. He wiped the Selkies off of the islands. And there is more. Where else is it? There's other place where the horned gods marry mermaids, like Durin and Grey King. So sometimes they're fighting and sometimes they're effing. So they were murdered by Selkies. That could fit this pattern of old ones warring against Selkies. Because, again, before humans, the green men and the children are the main, and the giants are the main, like, land denizens. So anytime you go near the water, you're going to be fighting with squishers in ancient day, I think. So it makes sense that there is this squisher green one conflict. Okay? So it could be that these maze makers who vanished unfathomably long time ago, I mean, thousands of years ago, they could be the same sort of creatures as the green men. They're a long way from Lang, but it just could be a different pocket of them, because this all goes back thousands of years. The other theory that I have for the maze makers, what if they weren't murdered by squishers? What if they were the squishers? And I want to get your opinion on this. The squishers are tall. They are big. Biter is big. The Ironborn are big. I think the squishers are big. In Lovecraft, squishers do build stuff. So it could be that a city of mazes built on islands that go underground, that could be squisher building construction. It could be. It could be that the legend is just a little mixed up. Instead of the maze makers were wiped out by the squishers, the maze makers were the squishers. Because I do think that what the Ironborn think there's watery halls underwater. The people from the Thousand Islands also think there are cities underwater. And in Lovecraft, the Deep Ones do build cities underwater right offshore of the places they are farming. So it could be that these mazes and underground cities are built by squishers. So the maze makers could be green men, or they could be squishers. Those are my two guesses. Now, Garth the Green, as I said, does not come from Westeros. He supposedly is the first man in Westeros, and he is the father of all the ancient first man houses, even the Starks. So, who is he? Is he from the Great Empire of the Dawn? Is he from Lang? If he's a green man, he could definitely be from Lang. Why did he come here? We don't know. How long ago was it? We don't know. Did he really come over land? We don't know that either. He's just possibly the first king of Westeros, who is a green man, and from whom all the first men descend. So I've always thought this is interesting because it implies that the first men all are descended from green men who are green seers. So it's not even that the first men all need to have married children of the forest. which might make them short, like the Cranog men. But the first men aren't short. So it could be that the Starks and the Cranes and the Blackwoods and the other first men houses that have skin changer genes, that's from green men. I mean, that's what's implied when it says that Garth the Green fathered all these people, right? So I've always wondered about that. We're supposed to believe that the Starks and all these other first men married with children of the forest, and that's why they have skin changer blood. Maybe Brandon of the Bloody Blade was having sex with children of the forest, and that's why the Starks are skin changers. But they're not short. The children of the forest are half the height. Half the height of people. So if you breed with people, you get the point. The hybrid offspring of children of the forest and humans should be short. And the Cranog men are short. And they are the ones who are most obviously having interbred with the children. So I think what the legends are telling us is that actually the first men get their skin changer and green seer genes not from children of the forest, but from green men. Because that's, again, Garth the Green is a green man, and he was the first man and fathered all the first man houses. So why don't humans look like green men? Why don't we look like this? If it was green men that fathered all the races of first men, what happened? I think that the first men might be a clue. The term first men might be a clue about the fact that the men were created. They were the first men that were made by the older races. So this is what I think, and I've talked to Tim about this. I think that human evolution was guided by these old magical beings, the old ones and whoever was in charge of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and that the modern form of humans that look like us were probably created from giants and hairy men and children of the forest and green men, probably all, you know what I mean? Like some combination of those things created humans. Because we all come from, I'll say we, like we live in Westeros, but the humans in Westeros, if they all come from Garth and he's a green man, and just about everybody else comes from the Great Empire of the Dawn, like what's at the heart of all this? Some really strange, magical humanoids that are doing breeding stuff. They're always doing breeding stuff. We're making lizard people, right? We're marrying with green men or children of the forest. We are having sex with Merlings all over the place. There's strange humanoids that we don't even know how they got there. The winged men and the lizard men and the brindled men. The hairy men are basically Neanderthals. They're still hanging around. Now, Neanderthals, of course, they are a separate evolutionary branch from humans. They are not our direct ancestor. But the hairy men in Ice and Fire, there's a couple different kinds. First of all, there's some that have been wiped out that were bigger than the ones. Then there's the men of Ib. The men from Ib are hairy, but they're not quite the same as the hairy men that the Dothraki wiped out. They're probably related, but you see what I'm saying? Like there is a progression of humanoid here that you can see. The giants are kind of human-like as well. So one gets the feeling that humanoids, that human beings, such as we see, we are like the most recent species on this planet that George has created. When he talks about the old races, remember, the children of the forest say all the old races. And we're like, well, what do you mean old races? There's you guys, the children of the forest, and the others. And like, who else? Like the squishers, I guess? But when you look around, no, there's brindled men, green men, hairy men, Nathi, a foot and a half tall dwarves that live by a shade of the evening trees. There's all kinds of stuff. And we don't know where it started. We don't know if these crossbreeds are made from humans. That's the way it looks at first. But I bet it's the other way around. I bet it's the weird humanoid creatures are what were combined to make people. At least I think George wants to play with that idea. So yeah, Therianthropes first means human-animal hybrids are actually the ancestors of people. not the children of people in Ice and Fire.